It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
One-on-one, taking you up until 2 a.m. on this Saturday night, soon to be Sunday morning, November 8th. Alongside Andrew Posadas, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Sam Davis will be along with the headlines throughout the 3 hours. Andrew, it's great to be with you tonight. We've got a lot to get into in the sports world, and I cannot wait to dissect all of it, and there's a lot of it with you.
And listen, I would just say for those listening on 90.7, I just recently got a haircut. So, Jimmy, I feel I feel tremendous. I feel like I have a fresh, clean slate. I'm ready to go. I'm at 100%. And I think Mets fans, including yourself, after what's happened yesterday with Steve Cohen and the cleaning of house, I think you feel exactly how I feel. You feel relieved. It's time. It's a new page in the chapter. And let's do this.
Yeah, I feel probably about how you felt after you saw that fade in the mirror. It feels great. Feels fantastic. Great. It's a new beginning. It's something completely different. And already, you read stuff on the internet, probably not entirely true, but you see them linked to Francisco Lindor and Trevor Bauer and George Springer and on and on and on. And I got to say, Andrew, it's really refreshing to see that. It's a big market team. It seems like they're going to start behaving like one in a matter of days. And that's what all Mets fans have been clamoring for years, is that the Mets go out and behave like a team that is playing in New York. Now they're going to do that with Steve Cohen. So, yeah, Andrew, you hit the nail on the head. As a Mets fan right now, seeing Steve Cohen officially take over the team on Friday, I'm in a great mood. I am in a great mood.
And I have to say, just a shout out to him because he's on Twitter answering all his fans, asking them, what do you guys want? And I think that's what Mets fans have been waiting to hear from the Wilpons for decades. Do you want to hear what we want as fans? And Steve Cohen's doing that. He's giving the people what they want. He's giving Jimmy Sullivan what he wants. And that means we're going to have a great, next couple of months? I mean, depending on what the Mets do, I mean, they're a few moves away from being a World Series contender. That's easy put, and Steve Cohen is looking to go in that direction.
Yeah, it's a lot to look forward to and should be a lot of fun. Not a lot of teams going to be spending this offseason, but hopefully the Mets, maybe will be one of them. I just ask that they do it wisely. But got a lot to get into in the next 3 hours. It's going to be a great show. Got some great guests coming up as well. Just a few minutes, we'll be talking with Paul Westhead, the guru of Go, if you remember the ESPN 30 for 30 former NBA, WNBA, college basketball head coach. He's got a new book coming out. And Andrew, it was great to talk to him with all of his insights on the game of basketball. And it sounds like a cliche when you say something like this. Paul Westhead has seen it all in basketball. This is a guy who coached Magic Johnson and Diana Taurasi. I mean, he has seen all eras and permutations of this great game, and I really look forward to talking to him. He's got a lot of insight into both the professional and the college games, so looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, we all know him for that revolutionary offensive pace, something that, people, when you see Mike D'Antoni, those elements came from Paul Westhead. So the fact that, as you mentioned, all the greats that he's coached, and the fact that he thought that his original book was going to be over after the Lakers let him go, but then obviously he gets new life with Loyola Marymount. ends up going to Phoenix. The Mercury wins the WNBA championship. It's been quite a journey, and Paul goes into all of that and more with us in that interview coming up.
So we look forward to that. That'll be in just a few minutes. So stick around for that. We'll also sit down with David Krell. He is the author of a new book entitled The Mets in Popular Culture. That's particularly prescient right about now with all that we've talked about with the Mets. And that is just about where the positivity stops, because then we'll be going into New York football. And Andrew, I don't even know where you start with this. I mean, you've got one combined win between the two teams. The Jets look like the worst team in football, and it's not particularly close. And you've got the Giants, who are a little better because the bar is on the floor. And you've just got I don't even know what to say anymore, to be quite honest. Like, we're going to talk about that stuff for like 15 minutes, and I have no idea what we're even going to do. Because it's just like at some point you run out of ways to say that they stink. It's horrible. But that's where we're at with New York football right now.
I mean, we have no choice. We have to talk local sports, and that means we have to talk Giants and we have to talk Jets. And obviously, the Jets themselves really have nothing at this point to offer us. But again, at the end of the day, the Jets themselves, they have a chance to win on Monday. As crazy as it sounds, with the people that are coming back, we've seen them a bit more healthier now, competitive, and the Patriots really in limbo themselves. They don't know what's going on. Bill Belichick has gone on record saying that they sold out in the last few years to win a couple more Super Bowls, and now they are just royally screwed, for lack of a better word. But again, the Jets have a shot, and the Giants, if they win on Sunday against Washington, or if either team wins, Jimmy, they are right in the hunt for the NFC least division. Oh, excuse me, the NFC East, where my Eagles reign supreme, even though that is nothing to talk about right now. But again, as crazy as it sounds, both New York teams, which is bad as they've been, both have very good shots to win their games this weekend.
It's really sad to ponder. I was thinking this because the Eagles and the Cowboys were on Sunday night the other night. And it's really sad to ponder that more than likely one of those two teams is going to be in the playoffs, hosting a playoff game at 7-8-1 or 7-9 against a team from the NFC South that's probably going to be 11-5 or 12-4. That's where we're at right now. It's sad, but it's what do you even like? The division's so bad, and yet here we are with the Eagles are going to host the Buccaneers in the playoffs. I mean, that's horrible.
Or I imagine that they might have to host like Arizona or the Rams, and then Carson Wentz just gets beat up by Aaron Donald, or Kyler Murray goes off for like 150 yards rushing on us. But again, don't listen, Jimmy. I need this. All right, the NFC East has been absolutely god awful. And at least the Eagles are in first place, because if they weren't even first place, I would have told you in our pre-production yesterday, we're not even talking NFC East. But they are. So, again, I'm happy, but the Giants, if they can just string a couple of wins together, and they can, with as competitive as they've been, they can absolutely do so. They can find themselves right in first place. And again, if the Giants, with everything that they've been through, losing Saquon Barkley and the woes on offense, especially with Daniel Jones turning the ball over, if they could somehow sniff a home playoff game, I mean, Joe Judge might have a statue built up at MetLife after the end of the season. Am I right?
Yeah, it's my God. I mean, you talk about it in that sense, but like it's crazy. What do you even do at that point? Like, that's just ridiculous. But that's where we are. I mean, that's the bar is so low in this division. The Giants are 2 games back, 2.5 games back. I mean, it's just insane. I don't even know what even to say anymore. The Giants have been competitive. Like, give them credit for that. We'll talk more about that later. The Jets have not been competitive. That has been well established. They have a chance on Monday night against the Patriots. The funny thing is, the only reason why I watch the Jets anymore is to see if they can cover these exorbitant spreads that they're up against, right? It was a double-digit spread they had against Buffalo. They were a 19.5-point underdog on Sunday against Kansas City. They didn't cover that one. But that's like the most intriguing thing about watching the Jets now, as they stumble towards the number 1 pick and a big decision to make, in which I think they will probably take Trevor Lawrence in the NFL draft. Now, does Trevor Lawrence take the Jets? That's another story. But we'll see what winds up happening there. We will also talk later on in the show with Otis Livingston of CBS 2. Otis, a great guy. We've had him on the show before. Myself and Chris Baccia will be around for that interview. And then in the 1 a.m. hour, we will get into some more NFL, but we'll also break down some college football. And Andrew, a pair of big games in college football this weekend. Florida, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame, 2 top 10 matchups. And Andrew, we were wondering, and to some extent we still are wondering, about the college football season and whether or not it would get to the finish line. But Saturdays like this are what we were kind of hoping for a few weeks ago. And we have gotten here. We've got these 2 great games, and Andrew, should be a lot of fun. I think both those games are going to be really, really solid.
Yeah, I think a big critique of the first few weeks of the college football season was the fact that there were no tasty matchups there because non-conference schedules are basically thrown out of the window amid the pandemic. But again, you're right. And we got the world's largest cocktail party. They don't call it that anymore, but I'm calling it that because that's a great nickname for Florida, Georgia. Although I think the state of Georgia might have more pressing matters at hand when it comes to counting ballots.
What do you mean?
When it comes to counting ballots, that might be something they want to focus on. But again, it's a huge game, 2 top 10 teams. And then you mentioned Clemson and Notre Dame. Clemson, no Trevor Lawrence, but DJ Uiagalelei, as it is correctly pronounced, he's been good. He had a great second half last week. And if Notre Dame, and I should mention this, our producer, Alex Walls, has Charles Barkley guaranteed that Notre Dame is knocking off Clemson tonight. So again, if Notre Dame is going to do so, this is absolutely the best situation and circumstances. No Trevor Lawrence, Jimmy. This is the night where the Irish might get lucky, so to speak, and knock off Clemson.
I will say, I mean, in all fairness, I would not say this to dunk on Alex. We love Alex, but
I love him.
Alex has been on the Clemson's gonna lose train for over a year.
Yeah.
he's big into the just like, because last year we were talking, he was like, oh, they're not gonna make the playoff, and now it's, oh, Notre Dame's gonna beat Clemson. I'm skeptical. Clemson's so good. Like, even last week, DJ played tremendously in last week's game. Now they got to fight for Boston College, and they'll get a fight tonight from Notre Dame. But that team, I mean, Travis Etienne's going to be playing on Sundays. Their defense is so talented. Their coaching staff is probably the best in college football right now. I mean, the structure they have is so good, and they're so uniquely equipped to handle the best player in the sport being out. Like, that's what we're dealing with here. Clemson is going into what could be a college football playoff elimination game without their best player and the best player in the sport, and we're sitting here saying they're at least even odds to win. I mean, that's how good this team is. And I will also say this, because we were talking in pre-production, myself, you, and Sam Davis, who you'll hear on the headlines later. This year in college football is so unique, so different. Everybody's playing a different number of games. If Clemson loses tonight without Trevor Lawrence, but Trevor Lawrence comes back, they play the rest of the season, they look like the team that we've been familiar with over the last couple of years. Do you put them in the playoff? I think you would, because you don't have your star quarterback. Now, if they win tonight, all that stuff is less complicated, because I think if they win tonight, I don't think they're losing for at least the rest of the regular season. But if they lose this game tonight without Trevor Lawrence, do you put them in? I would say yes, but that's a tough conversation.
And I'd agree. You would put them in, especially if Notre Dame wins out. Then that loss is actually a good loss if you're Clemson, because Notre Dame would probably be in the playoff too. But it is like we mentioned earlier in pre-production, this might have been the perfect year for an 8-team playoff, because then Clemson would have, some leeway. And if they were a 6, 7, or an 8 seed, they'd be incredibly dangerous. And they'd be, obviously, they'd have what it takes to win a couple of games and get to the final. But again, I think you're right. If Clemson, even if they lose tonight, it doesn't matter, because when Trevor Lawrence comes back, if they can win out and Notre Dame wins out, that's a great loss for them. And you could see both of these teams in the college football playoff, by season's end.
They could also play again in the ACC title game. We'll have to see what the circumstance is there. So we'll talk about that in the 1 a.m. hour, taking you up until 2 a.m. And let's be real. A lot of you listeners probably haven't gotten a lot of sleep this week. No reason to start now. We got Paul Westhead on the other side of this break, one-on-one on 90.7 FM. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
To one-on-one, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, and we are now pleased to be joined by Paul Westhead, former NBA, WNBA, and college basketball head coach, and he's the author of a new book called The Speed Game: My Fast Times in Basketball. I think an appropriate title for the guru of golf, Paul Westhead. Paul, how are you? Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm out here in the Los Angeles area, and everything's well.
Good. Happy to hear that. And let's talk about the book to start, because you've had just a tremendous basketball life. You've won an NBA championship, very successful college coach as well. What led you to sort of writing this book in the first place? Why do you think now was a good time?
Well, I've been writing it for some time. Parts of it were written back after I coached the Lakers in the early 80s. Was fired during my third season, and I had some free time. So I started writing and reflecting on my Laker time. And then years later, I started finishing things up when I was coaching in Japan for a couple of years. Had more free time then, since no one spoke English other than me and my wife. And then after I coached the University of Oregon women, I came back home and put it all together.
And Paul, when you say that after that final season, after 11 games, when the Lakers let you go, and you're already starting that book, at that time, did you ever think, well, by the end of the decade, I'll be at Loyola Marymount, bringing that team into national prominence? In those years in the mid-'80s, did you ever think when you were writing that book that book would have to be extended a second and then a third time when you ended up going to the WNBA with Phoenix?
Yeah, that's interesting. I made these notes about the Lakers. I knew it was going to be a significant part of my career. It's kind of interesting. We won a championship in 1980 in my hometown of Philadelphia, and I thought, wow, this is kind of easy. I'll get some more of these. Well, it took me 28 years later to get one with the WNBA with Diana Taurasi and the Phoenix Mercury. So the writing kind of got pushed aside until I had many more jobs. And then I was much more aware of what coaching's like and what your career is like and how you can win and everyone's happy and how you can get fired and everyone says, please leave town tomorrow.
Talking with Paul Westhead here on One. And Paul, going back to your college days in the mid to late 80s with Loyola Marymount, and that culminated in 1990 with the run through the NCAA tournament that ended up in the Elite Eight. Obviously, that was an emotional year for your team that year. What was just that whole experience like for you, that roller coaster of emotions where you had the tragic loss of Hank Gathers and then you make a deep run, Cinderella run, I should say, through the NCAA tournament?
Well, Loyola Marymount will probably be forever the job that, categorizes what I do as a coach. It's certainly, it was a speed game to the max. We were running and shooting within 5 seconds on every possession. We had picked up a new defense that we were defending full court and causing teams to also shoot within 5 seconds. So we were playing against ourselves, and that was the perfect formula, usually for wins, but perfect formula for a lot of scoring. So there were many games well into the hundreds on both sides. So that was a time that, I felt more involved in helping my players and they reciprocating and doing it exactly how we sketched it.
Paul, I think about all the great players that you've had the privilege to coach with the Lakers, obviously Kareem and Magic. You move over to Loyola Marymount, Bo Kimball, Hank Gathers, great college players in their own right. And then in the WNBA with Diana Taurasi, arguably the greatest of all time. What do those great players all have in common that makes them who they are and that made them such great players?
Well, I'll tell you one thing they have in common that affected me. When you have them, you win. So trying to reflect back on their ingredient is that they're highly skilled, highly talented, and yet the ones that you mentioned, they're highly motivated to win. And they kind of bring you along with them if you let them. So certainly with Kareem and Magic, I was gifted to have that combo inside out. And then with Hank and Bo, it was inside out. Like Hank dominated the boards, as you perhaps remember. He led the country in scoring and rebounding his junior year. And Bo was very happy to shoot outside shots anytime he touched the ball. You give it to Bo, I'm going to shoot it. And with Diana Taurasi, she was kind of in her own way, a little inside out. She could take you in and play outside. But I was surrounded with some very gifted players with her. I had Cappy Pondexter from Chicago, who was as tough as nails and could play, and Penny Taylor from Australia. So it wasn't like a two-star team with the WNBA, but that one star, Diana, could run the show for you.
Paul, before you outlined your philosophy, and it's the title of the book, The Speed Game, right? Shooting, scoring, fast breaks, spacing, so on and so forth. When you watch the game of basketball now at a lot of levels, it's going in that direction. More shooting, games tend to be higher scoring. How happy have you been to see that your philosophies, which maybe were not as well adopted by the mainstream, back in the 80s or 90s, have really become commonplace now? And we seem to be seeing an NBA game that's closer in alignment with how you used to coach.
Well, I appreciate your comment, and I would like to take credit for that, but I don't really think it's accurate. And by that I mean the outside shooting has increased 100-fold since the 80s. And I was a proponent of that. But only because we shot the ball so quickly and we tried to beat the defense down that if we took a slam dunk layup because you didn't get back in time, we'd do that all night long. But if you got a couple people back, then we'd shoot those corner jump shots with my player, Jeff Fryer, who still has the record in the NCAA tournament of 11 threes in one game. And translating that in today's game, I don't see a lot of speed. It is no way like my fast break game, with some exceptions. During the finals, the Lakers and Miami, I saw half a dozen times Anthony Davis, when Miami scored, sprint to the basket and get lead passes ahead of the defense. That's Paul Westhead fast break. But that happened 6 times in 6 games. You know, the rest of it was controlled. But the outside shooting, you're dead right. The same Anthony Davis, he'll shoot 25 footers like he's a shooting guard. So that part, I might have had some influence.
And Paul, you mentioned somebody like Anthony Davis. When you think about the players in this era and the amount of athleticism and talent, who are some players right now that you look at and say, gosh, if I had him in my system, we'd go crazy?
Well, for sure, Anthony Davis. He would be the terrific running wingman, 6'10", 7-footer. And interesting, I bring up because they had similar qualities. I coached Joe Bryant in college, Jelly Bean. And Jelly Bean could run with the best of them. He had that knack. So, it's really hard for me to go through the NBA and say, like, well, here's a player that would be great for me, because I don't know if they're willing to run as hard as my system demands. Like, I fell in love with Jimmy Butler, but I suspect Butler in a running game after about 6 days would say, Coach, we don't want any more of this. Let us do our own way. We'll be okay. So it's hard to pick players until you have them, and then I'd know.
Paul, we're talking about the NBA, and they just finished their season in a bubble, 2.5 to 3 months of just being in one place and kind of just focusing really only on basketball. I have to imagine that was a challenge for players and coaches. So let me ask you, as a coach, what would have been your biggest things to focus on when your team got into that situation of being in the bubble and really not having any contact with the outside world?
Well, I think it was a masterful idea that the NBA pulled off. My comparison, and I hope I could blend into this, it was like summer camp. Kids going to the Pocono Mountains, where I used to run a camp in Pennsylvania, and all you did was eat, sleep, and play hoops. So, these players, these wealthy millionaires with, all of the gifts that they have in the outside world, they gave it all up just to be boys again. In fact, some of the games, not the finals, but some of the games leading up to it looked like summer league. Guys were just running up and down, and nobody really seemed to care who won, who lost. They were just having a little fun for an hour or two. The finals were different, and I thought it was very well played. And Miami gave as much a challenge as they could, but they couldn't pull it off. So if I was in that bubble, I would still be running that fast break.
And Paul, we saw that bubble season end with LeBron James capturing his 4th NBA championship, and that only further throws fuel into the fire of probably the hotly contested debate, LeBron James, Michael Jordan. You were an assistant with the Golden State Warriors, MJ's final year with the Bulls. They made the Last Dance documentary. From your vantage point right now, does LeBron James have a chance to surpass Michael Jordan and be universally known as the greatest basketball player of all time?
Sure, he has a chance. But the benchmark from somebody who coached for the last 50 years, Jordan has set such a high benchmark. It's going to be tough to pass him. I think some people get close to equaling him. LeBron, one of them. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, they fit in that category. And when you start making lists, there aren't too many people far behind Julius Erving, and Bill Russell, etc. So I don't know if LeBron can pass Michael, but he's certainly making a great run at it.
Paul, we're talking about the Lakers here. You were obviously a coach for the Lakers, and you won a championship with them, as you said, in 1980. Going towards next season now, it's going to be another impacted season in the NBA. Not sure exactly how that's going to look, when it's going to start, how many games we're going to have, so on and so forth. When you look at the Lakers going into next year, coming off the championship and the bubble, how do you think they stack up in possibly trying to get another title, which would be LeBron James's fifth and possibly a back-to-back for the Lakers?
Yeah, I would advise what I learned in 1980. You win a championship, enjoy it, because you never know when the next one's going to come around. Yeah. So if I were the Lakers and Coach Frank Vogel, which, obviously did a great job, he ought to enjoy it right now and say, it might be my first, it might be my last, but this doesn't keep repeating itself over and over again. I mean, in the history of basketball, we do have the Lakers, we do have the Celtics. UCLA with Coach Wooden was the only team that seemed to dominate year after year after year, and we'll never see that again.
Paul, one of those teams that are going to come after the Lakers coming into this season is the Brooklyn Nets. And I mentioned the Nets because of Kevin Durant, and you had the chance to be an assistant coach and coach Kevin for the first 2 years, the first in Seattle, the second in Oklahoma City. He's coming off that torn Achilles injury. From what you've seen from Kevin in his early years and how he's progressed as a player now, how different should we expect him to be coming off of this Achilles injury? And can we expect that maybe he can get close to what he once was pre-injury?
Yeah, well, I can't attest to the injury because for every player, it takes time. I reflect back when Magic had his knee surgery in my second year and they brought him back. He wasn't ready. And some of our problems filtered down because it wasn't the real Magic Johnson yet. So I don't know how that will affect Kevin. But I will say about Kevin Durant as a rookie, I showed up my first practice. He was out there scrimmaging, and he was 18 years old then. He didn't have his 19th birthday until a couple of weeks after I arrived. And, he was just a young puppy. I mean, he was just running around doing things. You said, oh, my gosh, this kid can play. He is so much better now than he was in Seattle. In fact, just a little story about him as a rookie. During games up in Seattle, he would make 3 or 4 defensive mistakes in a row. And the head coach then, PJ Carlissimo, my good friend PJ, would take him out and sit him down. And he'd be down for 2, 3, 4 minutes. And I'd say, Pete, let's get Durant back in. And he'd say, no. A kid's got to learn that if you don't play defense, you don't play. So PJ doesn't get any credit, but he was helping Kevin Durant become the great player. And Durant eventually is going to be in that conversation with the top handful of players in the NBA.
Paul, we were just talking about Kevin Durant, and he's one of, I think, a lot of guys who can do just incredible things. He's a 7-footer. He can shoot. He's just incredibly talented. And I think we're seeing a really high talent level in the game today. How much do you look at that now, that what guys can do, their skill level, ability to shoot, handle the basketball, so on and so forth, in the game today? Do you marvel at that at all? Do you compare it to maybe how it was maybe even just a few years ago? How do you look at that now?
Yeah, I think if you ask coaches like myself and players of the 80s and that vintage, I don't think they would take a back seat to anybody. I think they would say, hey, bring it. Like, all right, boys. Yeah, you're a good team, Miami and the Lakers, and even here in my hometown, the Clippers are going to be a terrific team, and the Nets in the East Coast. But I would say what players do now that's different is that back in my coaching era, they were slotted. You were a point guard and you stayed a point. You were a power forward, and that's what you did. Well, now, I mean, players like Anthony Davis, he plays all over the place. Kevin Durant plays every position. So that's what's changed. The players have been multifaceted offensive players, inside out, outside in. And you didn't see much of that years ago.
And Paul, you are the only coach to have ever won an NBA and a WNBA championship. So I want to just talk about the WNBA real quick. We've seen the TV ratings for this past season in the bubble skyrocket. And as somebody who has long been an advocate for women's basketball, how satisfying is it that now that, women's basketball is starting to be invested in, that now we're starting to see those investments pay off in the TV ratings that we're seeing increase?
Yeah, it's been too long for the women's game professionally, for sure, to be pushed aside. I mean, I found that right away in 2007. I said, oh, gee, I'm going to put this team together. And I mean, how good can the opposition be? I was kind of being a smart ass. And then I found out how good this competition can be. And it took into a second season to us winning a championship in Detroit against a very good Bill Laimbeer team. So I am an advocate of women's basketball. I coach collegiately at Oregon, so I know what the college players can do. And the professional women are skilled, talented, very competent. I'm beside myself that they don't get more interest and coverage. And as you said, finally, they got a little bit of a break. It's a great basketball game, the women's game.
Well said. That's Paul Westhead, author of The Speed Game, My Fast Times in Basketball, a new book. Go out, get it. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Be safe and be well.
Thank you, Paul.
I appreciate it. Thank you. My pleasure.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Jimmy Sullivan and Andrew Posadas. I'm Sam Davis with your headlines. We begin in the NBA as the Players Association has approved a December 22nd start date for the 2020 and 2021 NBA season. It's going to be 72-game regular season. Training camp expected to start on December 1st. So let me bring in Jimmy and Andrew here. What do you guys think of this decision?
I think the NBA, like most leagues right now, is in a tough spot. They basically had two options here, right? You could either have a longer off season, start in mid to late January, and have a season of like 50 or 60 games. That would be less revenue. Or you could have this, which is going to be the shortest off season in the history of the NBA. 72 games, more revenue, but barely any off season. It's a really hard spot for the NBA to be in because from the sounds of things, it's not going to be a bubble. They're going to do this as normally as possible. And I think, the players, this felt kind of inevitable because I don't know if the players love this, but it's really their best of a few bad options. And I think Michelle Roberts, who's the head of the Players Association, is a real pragmatist. And we've seen it, whether it was coming into the bubble in May and June, whether it was, talking to players and keeping them informed on what they would lose out on if in late August, after the Jacob Blake shooting and the players going on strike, if they had decided to end the season at that point, what would be lost in their revenues and so on and so forth. So I'm sure that she has the players extremely up to date on the consequences of what would happen going down one path or the other. That being said, look, it's a tough spot for the NBA. And you also have to factor in the possibility that we could have the Olympics in July. Big if right now. And if you made me bet, I would probably say that it's not going to happen. But, you have to factor that in as well. So I think a really hard spot for the NBA to be in right now. And more than anything else, I think they're just trying to make the best of for sports and really a bad situation for everybody.
Yeah, guys, I think at the end of the day, what we know to be true in sports is that money makes the world go round. And when Adam Silver says that starting a season on December 22nd and having Christmas Day games on television is worth about $500 million to $1 billion, nobody can say anything to that. Nobody's going to say boo to that and say, no, we have to start later. Guys like LeBron James, who was on Instagram, and there was a stat that SportsCenter had showed up. I think there's only going to be 72 days from the last game of the finals where the Lakers clinched it to December 22nd. And he had the emoji of somebody with their hand on their face, kind of showing disapproval. But again, even if LeBron James doesn't like it, he's going to report. He's going to show up. Maybe he load manages for the first month. Maybe he doesn't. But again, when the money is like that, that's the amount of money that they stand to lose in the short and long term. There's not really much you can say. And guys, I think you'd agree, a majority of these teams have had a few months off already, not to mention those months off when the pandemic, when everything shut down back in March after Rudy Gobert tested positive. So again, I think a majority of the teams have had their rest. They're ready to go. And I think the only teams that have a problem with it might be the Final Four teams, LA, Miami, Boston, and Denver. Maybe they have a bit of a gripe. But again, the money is like that. And I think, as Jimmy mentioned, it's not going to be in a bubble-style environment. Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer had said that the NBA potentially wants to have MLB-style series to reduce travel for the upcoming season. So we could even see teams face each other 2 times in 3 days or 3 times in 5 days to make things a bit easier. Not sure how that's going to work. That'd be interesting to see. But Sam, it looks like the NBA is trying to work things out and navigate itself so that this upcoming season, whether it does and ultimately is a bit earlier than expected, it does work out in the long run and they're able to get another full season in, whether it be 72 games or not. That's still essentially a full season. So I think that's what the NBA is most focused on. Adam Silver, they want to get another season in, and if they can get it outside of the bubble, that's even better.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly a tough situation for the league, I would say. From a financial perspective, it totally makes a lot of sense. Obviously, the sooner you play, the better in that scenario. And then for Christmas Day is a huge day for the NBA. I think it's great for fans, too, coming back to watch their team start on Christmas Day. It's a lot of casual fans, I feel like, for the NBA start watching around then anyway, around that season. So that's definitely good for a fan perspective as well and for revenue. But I think the decision is also about the season after this one as well, because they're really trying to get on that normal schedule, back on that regular track, the October to June typical schedule of the NBA that we're used to seeing. And I think in order to do that, they kind of have to balance between, okay, let's play enough games this year to make it legitimate. 72 is plenty, but as well as giving these guys a little bit of a break, at least enough of a break. And I think pointing to that, it's very interesting because, like you said, teams like the Lakers and the Heat and teams that were deep into the finals or deep into the playoffs, they're playing off a very short off season. It was already a stressful time in the bubble. They were away from their families, obviously dealing with COVID while still trying to win a championship. So that's certainly a lot to ask. And you compare that with guys, 8 teams that didn't even make the bubble and have been home for a really long period of time. And that's a completely different scenario. I feel like they're dying to get back on the court and they just want to get the season done as soon as possible. So I feel like the league really can't please everyone here. And unfortunately, I think it's going to come down to teams like the Lakers and the Heat, the Celtics, even the Nuggets. They're going to have to deal with that short off season in these strange circumstances. I think the league is focused on revenue. It's focused on getting on track for a regular normal season from October to June the following year. So I think that's something that these teams kind of just have to sacrifice in order to have as normal of a season as we can next season for the NBA.
Yeah, and I think we also have to remember the I hate to say wild card with something so serious, but COVID is raging in America right now at a level that we have not seen since the pandemic started. So that's the ultimate kingmaker here, because the NBA's whole idea of going into the bubble was nobody's going to get COVID. They were right. Whether, we'll see what winds up happening. I don't think we're going to get a vaccine tomorrow. So who knows what's going to happen, with this virus. Everybody says the winter is going to be absolutely terrible. So if at some point there are a spate of games canceled, does a bubble become necessary? I don't know. So again, that's where the NBA is right now. They want to do things normally. They've even talked about having fans in the suites. I'm not sure if that's realistic at the jump, but again, we'll see what happens. But I think there's a lot to examine here with the NBA. They're in a difficult spot, but Adam Silver's done a great job through this entire thing, and I'm going to trust him to get through this season, and then hopefully after that we'll be at or close to normal by the fall of next year.
Yeah, and I would also add that Adam Silver has seen Major League Baseball and seen the National Football League navigate themselves and go through some spreaders and some teams having outbreaks in COVID. So I think when you see that template and you see what other leagues have done, I think it can help him and only benefit him to make sure, all right, how can we shore up and have, limited capacity, have teams travel and not have any sort of outbreaks that we saw in the regular season in Major League Baseball, or that we're seeing now in the National Football League, where it seems like each and every week we're getting multiple positive cases, but yet there's still games being played. So the fact that the NFL and Major League Baseball is still able to get through it, I think that bodes well for the NBA in trying to get another season in so that they can start their next season, the 2021-2022 season, on schedule next October.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the NBA had 0 positive cases, so they've never dealt with it before, which is crazy to say, but I mean, it's impressive on their part. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with it. I think Silver has done a great job, and I think he'll continue to do a good job. Moving on here, we're going to shift over to baseball. It did not take very long for the Mets owner Steve Cohen to make some big moves. On Friday, Cohen and the Mets parted ways with general manager Brodie Van Wagenen, as well as other members of the Mets front office. He also hired former Mets GM Sandy Alderson as team president. So what do you guys think of this move? What does this mean for the Mets in the upcoming season? Jimmy, I'm going to start with you as the Mets fan. What do you think?
I'm going to quote the words of Laura Albanese from Newsday, who said that Steve Cohen Thanos snapped the Mets front office out of existence. But that's what happened here. And we kind of knew this was going to happen. I didn't think it would happen within 3 hours of Steve Cohen officially purchasing the team, but we thought at some point they were going to clean house in the front office. Sandy Alderson's going to be the team president, and he's going to have a GM and a president of baseball operations underneath him. They're going for the Dodgers, the Cubs model, if you will, where Sandy Alderson is going to be the president of everything, right? Communications, PR. It's not just the baseball operations side of things. So who he hires as his GM, as the president of baseball operations, I think will be very interesting. Was I surprised to see the Mets front office clean house? No, because you have a new regime coming in. You have Brodie Van Wagenen, who frankly was a bad GM for the Mets. He made the JD Davis move, which was a really good deal, but otherwise the sum of his other moves served to deplete the farm system and not make the team appreciably better in the short term to justify doing so. Right, the Cano and Edwin Diaz trade was an absolute disaster, and some other moves that he made were just completely unnecessary as well. So the hope is that whoever they bring in here to run the baseball operations with the Mets will make smarter moves than that, and I think they will. I think Sandy Alderson's going to put smart people underneath him. The organization basically is going to report to Sandy Alderson, is what it sounds like. So I'm very hopeful with the Mets here. I think as long as they hire the right people, they need to kind of expedite it because they haven't really been able to do any interviews with conflicts of interest and whatnot. So I think the Mets are in a really good spot here. I think, as much as you hate to see people lose their jobs yesterday, I think it kind of had to happen, and we knew it was happening anyway. So that's out of the way. Now the Mets can build a front office, can build an analytics department, which they don't really have right now, and move on with this organization. So I'm really hopeful for what the Mets are going to do here in the coming weeks and months. And I think they are on the right track with smart people in charge. And hopefully, they bring in even more smart people here within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, Mets fans should really be ecstatic. I mean, that your owner is 100% in when things like this is premeditated. I mean, Steve Cohen was a minority owner. I'm sure he was in the shadows just looking at the Mets the last couple of years and wondering, if I get this team, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing it right after I sign at the bottom line. And that's exactly what he did. You clean house. And again, I don't think we're not expecting Steve Cohen to say, all right, I'm going to start throwing $400 million in my payroll. I mean, he could absolutely do that because, again, as an owner, he hasn't lost anything because of the pandemic. A lot of these MLB owners are going into next season a little bit strapped because of the revenue losses that they've suffered from not being able to have a full season, a normal season with full capacity. So Steve Cohen's kind of going in saying, hey, I have all my money. If I want, I can go all in. But Mets fans probably don't need him to do that. They're set up. I mean, if he can just add some money into that bullpen, you get Syndergaard coming back. You still have DeGrom. Seth Lugo is there. He's been as dependable as he's been this last season. And then that offense, the pieces are there with Alonso. If you want to trade Rosario for Lindor, that's up to them. But again, I think Steve Cohen has put out the template that, hey, we're starting brand new. We're starting fresh, and we're going to be a top 10 spender in Major League Baseball. We just have to be, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, the Mets really are a few pieces away from being a World Series contender. Without a doubt, they have the building blocks there on offense and in their pitching staff. Again, it's just up to them. Are they willing to spend that extra $50 to $100 million to shore up other parts of that team? And Steve Cohen, he's going out and he's telling fans, hey, what do you guys want? Tell me. I want that feedback. And with his decisions coming quick and swift, I think, Sam, it's safe to say that Steve Cohen is all in, and Mets fans should be absolutely excited for what next season will bring once free agency and these winter meetings begin.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys talked about at the top of the show, I mean, Cohen's just a breath of fresh air for this organization. I mean, it was only a matter of time that Brodie Van Wagenen was gone, and it was the right decision, obviously. I'm interested in seeing who Cohen looks for a replacement at GM, or who Sandy Alderson looks for as well. I think also Rojas at the manager position, his job might be in a little bit of a question here. He obviously was dealt kind of a tough hand after Carlos Beltran left, and short season and a bunch of unique situations there that he was kind of dealt with immediately. But I'm really interested in seeing what the Mets do in free agency. Like you said, Andrew, I think there's certainly guys out there, and Cohen has the checkbook if they really want to go out and get somebody like Francisco Lindor, who they already said, he won't be starting with the Indians on opening day, supposedly. So that's a potential guy they could go get. I know Trevor Bauer's on the out there in free agency too. George Springer, those guys are a little bit, further reaches for the Mets. Who knows if that would happen? They might not be the best fits, but they are out there, and I'm very curious to see what Cohen does because. And this front office for the Mets that he handpicks himself. But overall for the Mets, I think it's an exciting time to be a Mets fan.
Certainly is. And, you talk about the free agents out there, and you talked about Luis Rojas. I'm going to stick my neck out for Luis Rojas. He deserves another shot because he was dealt a tough hand, as you said, last season. His decisions, you could argue with them. There was a rationale behind all of them. And Mickey Callaway managed by the seat of his pants. Everybody knew that. And Luis Rojas didn't do that. He had good reasoning for his decisions. Did they not work out sometimes? Yeah, but he has the respect of the players. He has, experience now being a major league manager for a season, short as this one may have been. So, yes, I think he deserves another shot, and I think he could be the manager of the future for this team.
Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna switch gears a little bit, but still stay in baseball here, and we're gonna talk about the Boston Red Sox. Alex Cora, who has been rehired as the manager of the Red Sox after his suspension due to his involvement in the sign stealing scandal. Obviously, we all know about that. The fans and players in Boston, I love the move. How do you guys feel though? And my second question here to connect with that is what's going to be the impact of Alex Cora and the Red Sox on the AL East next season and going forward?
I'll answer the second question first. I think that this brings the Red Sox back to some level of legitimacy. How good this roster is, very debatable. That just remember that they are coming off of trading the second best player in baseball for payroll flexibility. So that was an extremely debatable move. That being said, I think there's a larger discussion to be had here with the sign stealing scandal, with everybody's role in it. Alex Cora, AJ Hinch, Carlos Beltran all lost their jobs as a result of it. 2 out of the 3 have gotten their jobs back. And I think at the end of the day, with the Astros getting a ring in 2017 from that scandal, with Alex Cora getting a manager's job, getting a ring with the Red Sox in 2018, I think most, if not all, of the people involved in that sign stealing scandal, given what the punishment has been, given the fact that for the most part, except for Carlos Beltran and Jeff Lunau, they have landed on their feet, I think most, if not all, of those people involved would do it again. And I think that is the ultimate black mark for baseball, is that you've had the biggest scandal in 100 years, and yet here's AJ Hinch with a job. Here's Alex Cora, who got to take a year off, which is probably the best year to take off in 2020. So, yeah, I think everybody in this situation, give them the option, tell them how it would end up. I think they'd do it again. I really would. And that tells you everything you need to know about the way Major League Baseball has handled this, how the teams have handled this. And look, actions have consequences, except sometimes they don't. And in this case, it doesn't seem like they did.
Yeah, again, they were able to win a World Series. So, again, I don't think anybody's regretting that on the Astros' parts, and everyone has been really unapologetic about it. And, to everybody's own, I mean, that's up to you. I mean, you're a cheater, in my opinion. But again, they have the World Series title, and that's on them. But I mentioned the word premeditated when talking about the Mets. I don't have any evidence, but it has to feel like Boston was always going to hire Alex Cora back. They just let him go away for a year, serve your suspension, do what you have to do, and then come back, and then we can rebuild again. But as Jimmy mentioned, when you trade your best player because you don't want to pay that much money, I mean, is Alex Cora going into a situation where, all right, let's go get some big names and be the Boston Red Sox of old? It looks like the Red Sox are trying to go the Rays route, have a smaller payroll, and try and build from within and get some younger guys in there to transition. But again, we don't know. We can only see, but everyone talks glowingly of Alex Cora, of how he can manage and him as a player. So you got to think that Boston can only go up from where they were this past season. And I would say, again, Carlos Beltran, and I know Jimmy just said Luis Rojas, his job should be safe and he deserves a second chance. But if you're Steve Cohen and you bring in a new GM, are you not entertaining perhaps the possibility of giving Carlos Beltran a call and saying, hey, you served your time. Do you want to come back and actually give this Mets job a try? So again, I think Jimmy's right. All three guys are going to have jobs. We already see Hinches with the Tigers, Cora now with the Red Sox. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility for Carlos Beltran if the Mets have a tough start to next season and Luis Rojas gets the axe. Maybe we could see Carlos Beltran come back and see what he does end up, or what he ultimately would have done with the Mets before he was suspended last season.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in here really quickly before you make your point, Sam. I think it's a little different with Beltran only because Alex Cora has a ring, AJ Hinch has a ring, illegitimate as it may be. Carlos Beltran does not have any managerial experience or even coaching experience, really. So, I mean, you could argue he was like a player coach on the Astros in 2017, and with the amount of time he obviously put into that scheme, he definitely had that level of value, but he doesn't have the cachet of those other two guys. So that's why I ultimately think the Mets are not going to make that call. But Andrew, it's not out of the realm. I mean, could they do it? Yeah. And I think it would be a shame if that happened, to be quite honest. That's how I feel. So, yeah. So I'm angry again.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's funny to look at teams definitely forgiving these guys immediately for the actions that they did. And I mean, as a Red Sox fan, certainly I do like the move. I mean, fans love Alex Cora and the players love him too. But unfortunately, I have to bring up the point that he can only play the team he's given. And this season, I mean, the pitching staff is very weak, and I don't think the Red Sox front office are willing to make the moves in order to get someone big like a Trevor Bauer. I don't even think they're really in that conversation right now. And until that happens, I mean, the Rays and Yankees at the top of the division, they're going to be hard to catch right now. And I feel like Cora will definitely be a nice little addition for the Red Sox and will definitely help the lineup. But the pitching staff still needs a lot of help. I don't think they're going to get it in 2021. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And the Red Sox and Tigers each bringing back disgraced managers. So, Sam, we will talk to you again later in the show, just past midnight here on the East Coast. David Krell joining us on the other side of this break. Stay with us. You're listening to One on One on 90.7 FM.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back, Jimmy Sullivan, Chris Bacci with you. Now, pleased to be joined by author David Krell. He is the author and editor of the New York Mets in Popular Culture, a series of critical essays. You can see the book right there. David, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us here today. How are you?
I'm great, Jimmy. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for being here. And before we get into the book, we are recording this interview just a couple of days after the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series for the first time since 1988. As a lot of Mets fans know, Dodgers and Mets are pretty inextricably linked, given the history of the Mets and how they came into being after the Dodgers and Giants went out west. David, I'm just curious as to what your reaction was to watching the Dodgers win it all on Tuesday night.
Well, it's certainly good for Brooklynites, or maybe bad for Brooklynites who really have a bad taste in their mouth since the late 50s. But there is a nexus, as you guys know, between Los Angeles and Brooklyn. The Brooklyn team went to LA in 1958, and they've had a lot of success there. You can't help but think about 1988 because the Mets could have gone all the way that year. And a lot of people favored the Mets to beat the Dodgers in the playoffs, but that wasn't what the fates allowed or intended. And I think it was a good thing for baseball when you have the LA Dodgers in the World Series for the first time in 30 years, or the first legitimate contender in quite some time. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. They were in the World Series a few times, but this one was the first that they won in 30 years. That's always good for baseball. It's a good story. It's like the Cubs winning after a big drought. Now the Dodgers finally got their title after a big drought. So I'm very happy for them and for my fellow Dodger fans.
And sticking in 1980s, because you mentioned that National League Championship Series with a Mets team in the 80s that is the intrigue of Mets history to me, and that's of course a generation before Jimmy and myself, but really my father's generation, where some excellent Met teams, one World Series Met team.
Right.
You talk about in the book some of the pernicious effects of what was winning, being dominant. I'm curious if you could go into that, how this team that was so good sort of wasn't able to do more when they very well could have.
Well, you have to remember when Dwight Gooden came in 1984 and had that explosive season, it was so glorious, partly because the Mets had been bad for so long. Ever since Seaver was traded in 77, we just suffered through some really bad years. All of a sudden, here comes this kid who isn't even old enough to buy beer and is firing that ball at 100 miles an hour. So that really brought a lot of joy and hope. And it was realized, I think, about that was 84. So 86 is when they won against the Red Sox. In 85, of course, we got Gary Carter. That proved to be integral. But I think what you're getting at is the aura of the Mets, and the aura in that decade of the 80s, which some might say it was a decadent decade. I talked to Paul Hensler, who authored the essay about the 86 Mets, and I said, we have to put this in context because there might be some younger fans like yourselves who don't understand because pop culture sometimes gets lost, and I'm a nostalgia guy. So I said, let's inject some nostalgia. What was going on in the decade? You had Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. That show would never get on the air today because of what's going on in the culture. But we glorified decadence. We glorified luxury. And there was a swagger in pop culture. There was a swagger to J.R. Ewing, who was the main character on Dallas. And you either loved him or you hated him. Joan Collins played Alexis Carrington on Dynasty. And that was another character, just had this cockiness, this arrogance. Ghostbusters, the Bill Murray character, Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. There was just this resonance going on. And if you read Jeff Pearlman's book, The Bad Guys Won, you see that attitude all through the book and what the Mets were really about. Now, we might not have known that at the time as fans, but looking back, when you read Jeff's book, it kind of makes sense. And when you go through the Holland Tunnel, or the Lincoln Tunnel rather, in those days, and you see the big mural of Dwight Gooden on that building, just as soon as you get to New York, there was something really delicious about it for Mets fans because the Yankees had dominated the culture. We have 69 and 73, you got to believe. But the Yankees have Ruth and Gehrig and Mantle and DiMaggio and Reggie and Billy, and they dominated our attention for so long. So finally, we got something of our own. We had the spotlight. And if you listen to Howie Rose talk about the 80s, especially the mid 80s, he has said the Mets owned the city at that time. And that had never been done before.
Talking with David Krell, author and editor of the New York Mets in Popular Culture. David, I think your book does a really good job in the series of essays in explaining the aura of the Mets. And I think a big part of that goes back to the 1960s, a decade in which on the field, other than 1969, the Mets were largely very bad, but they came into existence and they were immediately very popular. You even, there was one point in the copy that I read that said that while the Yankees were still really good in the early 60s, the Mets were getting all the love in their first couple of seasons.
Right.
I'm sure there's a number of factors for that. And obviously, I wasn't there, but why do you think that would be, that a team like the Yankees could be so successful, but a team like the Mets that goes out and starts its history by losing 120 games winds up getting all the love? Why do you think that is?
Well, I've talked to fans who were around at that time, and they say that the one thing that nobody talks about is when they lost to the Dodgers and the Giants, it was difficult to follow them closely. So they're out in California. When the Mets come into being in 1962, guess what happens? Those guys are coming back. When they have road trips and they're going through Philly and New York, you're going to get to see them play. You're going to get to see Willie Mays again, and Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. Now, folks like Duke Snider might have been at the end of their careers, but you had a lot of people who really engendered a lot of love. And to see the National League stars coming back, not just the Dodgers, Giants, but other folks, it was really a hidden jewel and a hidden asset for the Mets to market to fans. And I think that's why the fans loved them. You had 4 years where the Yankees were the only game in town, 58, 59, 60, 61. So finally, there's another outlet for people who used to follow the National League.
And of course, integral to that period of time in Mets history is Tom Seaver, the greatest pitcher in the history of the franchise. And of course, the baseball world lost him just a couple months ago. Yes. In August. So my question to you is, Tom Seaver, how big of a deal is he? We know he is an enormous deal, but what does he mean to the history, the culture of this franchise?
Well, whatever people talk about, multiplied by 50. Because when he came onto the Mets in 67 and then 68, Gil Hodges comes in and he kind of transforms the team from that lovable losers persona that the press had stuck on them for so long to, no, this is a business. These are competitors. These are professionals. We're not going to talk about lovable losers anymore. And then the following year, they won the series. Seaver just injected that stardom, that humility, that excellence. And I dare say that he's still not fully recognized. When you talk about pitchers of his era in the 60s and 70s, he doesn't always get mentioned first. And I think he ought to. We should have a statue of him. I understand we'll have one. But when he was traded, Chris, he did not want to go, except for the Mets were making it really difficult during the salary negotiations. And also Dick Young, the Daily News columnist, referenced his wife. And there's a line. You don't mention families in sports articles. There's a line that you just don't cross. And when he said that Nancy Seaver was jealous because she's friends with Nolan Ryan's wife and Nolan Ryan was making more money, that's, as the story goes, when Tom Seaver went to the front office and said, "Get me out." And then he went to Cincinnati and we got 4 players in return. So that's the long answer. The short answer is you can't say enough about Mr. Seaver and what he represented. And that's not to take anything away from Jerry Koosman or John Matlack or some of the other great pitchers. We actually have an essay in the book about the pitching staff between 69 and 73 and how they're underrated and underanalyzed in terms of the pantheon of pitching in the early 70s.
you talk about that pitching staff in the book, and Tom Seaver is obviously the franchise, and he's probably the greatest player in the history of the Mets. But another player that's getting recognized and was supposed to be this year, but that's obviously been pushed back, is Jerry Koosman. He was supposed to have his number retired during the season. That ceremony wound up not happening because of when it was supposed to be and the coronavirus. But when you think about a guy like Jerry Koosman, who I think is kind of underrated, as you said, what do you think that means to Mets fans that he'll have his number up there alongside Seaver and Hodges and Stengel and Piazza?
Well, I think for Mets fans of a certain age, people who were around in the 60s and 70s who saw him play, they will say it's a long time coming. And there's some rule, I think it's an unwritten rule about not retiring a number unless the person's in the Hall of Fame. And it looks like the Mets are showing some flexibility on that front, but he's certainly beloved, and he was a major part of that 69 season.
One of the chapters in the book goes into the West Wing, one that you wrote. And I'm a big fan of the show. And, you talk about Josh Lyman, the character in the show, and that he represents some of the swagger of the New York Mets, of the era that he may have been coming of age. And one of those points is hope. And the Mets are so tied to hope. You got to believe. And of course, what they're able to do in 1986 in the unlikely fashion that it happened. Do you speak a little bit to that and the connection with the West Wing?
Well, if you watch the West Wing, you know that Josh is the optimistic one. He's the one who's always trying to find a way to work something out, whether it's a bill, whether it's a Supreme Court justice nomination. And it's really Toby, who's the Yankees fan, who is more obstinate. It's Toby who seems more entitled at times. It's Toby who gets really angry if things don't automatically go the way of the Bartlett administration. So there was a nice juxtaposition. And when I thought about the chapter, I said, gee, they are, wait a minute, there is a swagger about Josh. There is a hope. That no wonder he's a Mets fan. There is something there. And Richard Schiff is certainly a big celebrity Yankees fan and has been for decades. So to write that was really, really interesting. And I think if people haven't seen the show, they ought to stream it or buy it on Blu-ray or DVD, because it is a pretty good antidote for what's going on and viciousness of politics nowadays.
One of my favorite quotes out of that show was Toby's talking about Yankee Stadium. He says, I've been to 441 games. There is not a single person there who's ordinary. Moving on, I feel like we can't do this interview without me asking you, because it's a big part of the book. There's an essay in there about Joan Payson, the original matriarch of the franchise, just how much she meant, her immense philanthropic contributions. Just how much did Joan Payson not only mean to the Mets, but also mean to the community around her? How beneficial was her presence in stewarding the Mets in their early existence?
Oh, tremendously beneficial, Jimmy. She loved the game. And you might not expect that from somebody who collects $1 million pieces of art, or goes to the opera, or is a member of the Whitney family, which she was. The Whitney Museum is one example of many with the Whitney family name on it. And I just think that she should be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know why she's not. She was integral to getting the Mets off the ground. She was a Giants stockholder. She dissolved when they moved to San Francisco, dissolved her ownership. And then when the Mets franchise became available, she was the one. And just really a marvelous lady, didn't have a luxury box. She sat right in front at the dugout. She kibitzed with the coaches and the managers. I mean, there are pictures online of her talking with Yogi Berra before a game. There was none of this nonsense where they had to call the owner to break down the game, pitch by pitch or batter by batter, and what went wrong and specifics that you hear about so often in any sport. But I think that she really is underrated when it comes to owners. And there's only one woman in the Hall of Fame, as you guys know, Effa Manley, who owns the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues. It's time we have a second woman in there, and it ought to be Joan Payson.
David, a question about Shea Stadium. There's an essay on Shea in the book as well, and really personifies the Mets in a lot of ways. Scrappy, and I have very early memories of it. But of course, the era of Shea Stadium is now over. But your thoughts on how that contributes to the energy of the New York Mets, all the concerts that were hosted there,
Right.
and just what it means to the franchise.
Well, remember that Shea Stadium was built in '64, or it opened in '64. And that meant that it was new for a new ball club. The Astrodome, same thing. They opened in '65. The Astros opened the Astrodome in '65. So it was synonymous with something being new. And I think that's what drew people to it. I think that's why it became an icon. People talk about Shea with a certain reverence. They don't talk about Veterans Stadium with the same reverence. And my theory is because you're talking about something that was new for a new ball club. And there were so many rock concerts, as you mentioned. The Beatles, obviously, that was the one that kicked it off. But there were stars who just fled there. And it's interesting because you would think, well, Yankee Stadium. Why not Yankee Stadium? Why not Dodger Stadium? But Shea really was the place that one rock star described the top of the mountain. And it's interesting that he would say top of the mountain to describe a ballpark in Queens and not these other ballparks that are certainly more glamorous, certainly have more history, but there was something cutting edge about it.
David, before we let you go, can't end this without asking you about your reaction to the current state of the Mets. Looks like the sale to Steve Cohen is going to go through, but for the possible intervention of New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, it's still not entirely clear if he's going to go along with that sale. As a fan, just what's your reaction to what's going on with the Mets and their sale right now?
Well, if the mayor stops the sale or tries to in any significant way, I think that's bad for baseball. I think it's bad for the city. It's certainly bad for the Mets. We spent a long time trying to get a new owner, and we spent a long time hoping for a new owner. Just nothing against the Wilpons, but maybe someone with fresh blood. Maybe it's time to give someone else a chance. And I think that I think that there's nothing to be gained from standing in the way of a guy who wants to own the team, treat the team well, treat the people in the New York area well, whether they're Mets or Yankees fans. If the Mets are good and the Yankees are good, that's just better for the city. That's more people watching baseball. That's more viewers on television. That's more people buying sweatshirts and hats and jerseys. Why would he want to step in front of that? Why would he want to step in front of Mr. Cohen wanting to lay down the money to buy this team? And from all we see, invest in it. Invest in free agents. Invest in maybe refurbishing the ballpark, updating it. Who knows? I don't see anything to be gained, quite frankly, Jimmy. I don't know why there's this cat and mouse political game going on, whether it's for headlines or to flex muscles. I really don't know. And I hope it gets resolved soon.
As do I think the both of us, and we'll
Us
hope
too.
that it does. He's David Krell, author and editor of The New York Mets and Popular Culture, a series of critical essays. David, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. 12:24 a.m. taking you up until 2 in the morning here on the East Coast. Glad you're with us. Andrew Posadas, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Sam Davis will be along with the headlines a little bit later in the hour. Andrew, the Jets and Giants are playing this week. Some would not say that's a fortunate development, but it's happening. We'll start with the Jets. They've got Monday Night Football taking on the New England Patriots. Both of these teams are playing not good football right now. The Patriots come in at 2-5. The Jets are 0-8. Andrew, it's a game of two teams that are struggling, and we were talking before the show. I think this is the best chance the Jets have had to win probably since the Denver game in Week 4, and maybe all season. So I think an interesting game forthcoming on Monday night, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Patriots, they're just beat up, just a bunch of injuries. I don't think Stephon Gilmore is going to play. Still no Edelman. N'Keal Harry's out with a concussion, I believe. And they're trying to avoid their first 5-game losing streak since 95. So this isn't the Patriots. This isn't your dad's Patriots. This isn't even your grandfather's Patriots. It's like your great-grandfather's Patriots right now. The Patriots have been that good in the last 20-some-odd years. But again, for the Jets now, I mean, you're trying to avoid an 0-9 start. And Sam Darnold, we don't know how healthy he is. We know that AC joint in his shoulder has been bothering him throughout the entire season. And for the Jets, as you mentioned, this is perhaps arguably their best shot to get a game. If you're going to catch the Patriots, this is when you want to catch the Patriots, when they're kind of licking their wounds and trying to go back to the drawing table and see what they can do, especially on offense, Jimmy, because even with Cam, they have no weapons. That running game, everyone's just hurt. They can't put up points. I think they're 29th in points right now at about 19th. And I think the Jets are second to last, if not dead last. But again, for the Jets, they just started getting pieces back. You get Mims back. You're hoping to get Crowder back as well. I mean, for the Jets, if you get your pieces back and you have some of those guys on offense and you give targets to Mims and you run Pirine and you get Sam in positions where he can get the ball out quickly, I don't see why not. But if the Jets can't win this one, there shouldn't be any excuses. I think we hear too much, Jimmy, from Adam Gase and from Sam Darnold, and people kind of blaming themselves, like saying, oh, we have to be better. As the players, we have to be better. And then Gase is like, as the coaches, we have to be better. At some point, you don't want people to start pointing the finger, but you kind of have to just single people out and hold them accountable. If you're Adam Gase, if you're a player, you have to say, hey, coaching-wise, we have to blame some of that on the coaches. And if you're the coaches, you have to blame your players. Something's got to happen where I don't think people are holding people accountable, but they're not really. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. The good news is Joe Douglas, the GM of the Jets, came out this week and said that Adam Gase is part of the solution. So that should make you feel a lot better about having him around as the head coach. Adam Gase, by the way, as head coach of the Jets, is 7-17 with 13 double-digit losses. So that's an even worse ratio than what he had in Miami. So he's coaching for his job, at least you hope, but we'll see. But it's an interesting game, Andrew, because we don't know about the status of Sam Darnold. He's got a shoulder injury. He's got the weapons coming back, but like Denzel Mims last week, for example, they didn't really throw to him. Yeah. So that's got to be a frustrating thing for Jets fans. I just can't pull the trigger on picking the Jets. That sounds terrible, but they've given you a sample size of being absolutely terrible. And why would you pick them? I picked them against Denver, but that was against the third-string quarterback. As bad as New England's playing right now, there's just no reason to do it. So I'm not going to. I'm going to take the Patriots.
I think the only way you pick the Jets is if some people have a vested interest gambling-wise in Las Vegas and New Jersey. You might want to take those 8 points from what I've seen. So if you're into that sort of thing, Jimmy, or anybody listening right now, the Jets are getting 8. So you might want to take those points and run for dear life. Because, again, New England, they don't score the ball very well. Their defense is decimated. The Jets are going to be right in this. This is going to be a one-possession type of game throughout the night. And what we saw last week from the Giants and the Bucks, where that was a close competitive game, it just feels like this Monday night football matchup, is going to be kind of like what we saw with the Eagles and the Cowboys on Sunday night primetime. Just going to be a bad game that's just close for no reason. Maybe the Patriots get ahead and build a lead towards the end of the fourth quarter, but I have to think it's going to be messy. Somebody's going to win by one possession, and if you're the Jets, might as well do it now because, again, Jets fans are looking for something. You don't want to go 0-9. The last time they went 0-9, right here I have it. Yes, since the 96 season where they lost their first 8 games under Rich Kotite, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes.
They went 1-15 that season. So again, long time ago. And for me, Jimmy, it just the way we beat on the Jets, I kind of feel like Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting at the end where he goes to Will and he says, "It's not your fault." And that's what I feel like saying to you and all the Jets fans here that comprise our FUV sports staff. And here in New York, it's not your fault, Jets fans. It's not your fault. This isn't your fault. Again, what the Mets are doing, I think the Jets need to take a small page of that, not clean house, but Adam Gase has got to go. The whole coaching staff has got to go. You got to clean house somewhere. I think if you're the Johnsons, maybe you take a page from Steve Cohen and say, all right, let's get this entire coaching staff out of here. Give Joe Douglas the keys to kind of keep building this team, bring in his new staff, and see where they can take this team. Because I think we both can agree there is talent on both sides of this ball. But again, the leadership just isn't there.
Yeah, I had to go see a better Trevor. That's just the way it is. But it's frustrating as a Jets fan. Yeah, I can't lie to you. After the bye, the Jets have the Chargers, Dolphins, and Raiders. Those are tough games. This is the best chance the Jets are probably going to have at a win. Other than that Chargers game, just because the Chargers find incredible ways to lose every week, which is incredible. Chargers are a lot better than their record suggests. They just find a way to lose those games, as opposed to finding a way to win. Okay, so I've got the Jets losing. There's no hope there. There's, I guess, a little hope with the Giants. They're 1-7. They're taking on Washington this week. Probably a do-or-die game if they want to have any chance in the NFC East. Andrew, as you look at this one, Giants come in playing competitive football, losing football, but competitive football. They've got probably a decent chance of winning this one. I'm going to take the Giants in this game. I think this is the week that they can get on the board. Keep in mind, the last time these two teams played, a few weeks back, Washington scored the touchdown that would have sent it to overtime, except they went for 2 to try to win the game. It didn't work out for them. I think the Giants will win this game. I think they've been banging down the door. It's going to come down this week. And the Giants get to 2 wins and probably safely assume the mantle of the NFL's best team in New York.
And that is saying a whole lot at this moment. But again, I said it a couple of weeks ago on One-on-One. I really believe, although the Eagles are in first place right now, and I love me some Philly, the New York Giants have been the most competitive team, I think, week in and week out. They've given their best efforts consistently. And the last 4 games for the Giants, including that win against Washington, all of them have been decided by 7 points or less. So when you think about that, that's kudos to Joe Judge. And how about Coach Judge? The other day I saw on Twitter, Golden Tate was on the practice squad after he had some words. Joe Judge, again, Golden Tate is a Super Bowl champion. This is a guy who has been successful, went to Detroit, had some good years too, was in Philadelphia, a guy who's very much respected in the league, a veteran. And Joe Judge puts him on the practice squad to be Terry McLaurin for this Sunday's matchup. So when you think about that, Joe Judge really he has come in there saying, I don't care who you are. I'm here to coach, build a new culture, and make the Giants into a championship caliber team that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years where they were able to get 2 rings with Eli Manning and Coach Coughlin. So again, you got to love what Joe Judge is doing. I think it all comes down to Daniel Jones. Some of these turnovers, and as somebody who's watching Carson Wentz play on a weekly basis, you just see them and you just scratch your head and just wonder, what are you thinking there? And Daniel Jones, stats and info, they bashed him after that Monday night game. Even though they didn't have to, the stats just speak for themselves. He has 12 games since the start of last season with multiple turnovers. That's 3 more than any other player in that span. And after that Monday night game, Daniel Jones, 34 turnovers over the last 2 seasons, second most in the NFL behind, guess who? Jameis Winston, who is riding shotgun to Drew Brees in New Orleans. So that's really it. If Daniel Jones can just cut the turnovers cut the fumbles, cut the interceptions. This is a Giants team that could actually have been at 500 or even higher right now, if you think about it, Jimmy. They really could be leading the NFC East comfortably if he wasn't turning over the ball like this.
Yeah, they would. And you look at him, 7 TDs, 9 picks this year. There was a piece I read yesterday on SNY, a gentleman by the name of Scott Thompson, who, full disclosure, is a coworker of mine, went back and, bless his heart, looked at every single Daniel Jones turnover since the start of 2019. And 21 interceptions, 15 fumbles, found that 61% of them were his fault. So, you talk about the pieces around Daniel Jones, and I understand, you're pressing. I get that. The pieces around him aren't great, particularly without Saquon Barkley, but there's concern here. Now, I was watching the game on Monday night, and I have to say, there are very large aspects of being an NFL quarterback that he does not get. And I don't know if he will. And to his credit, he gets up there and he's like, in the press conferences, he owns up to it, whatever. But at some point, you have to see progression. And that's not happening here. And we can talk about Jason Garrett all we want, and maybe he's doing an okay job with the offense. The number one thing you needed to see was progress out of Daniel Jones. It's not happening. If anything, he's going in the wrong direction. And there was a lot of question when they took him. It was a reach at 6. Let's just be honest about that. But man, oh man, he is struggling to read defenses. And they played against Tampa Bay on Monday night. Bruce Arians, in his typically blunt fashion after the game, said, the kid's just trying to do way too much. It's true. Daniel Jones is doing way too much. The Giants are suffering as a result. And as you said, Andrew, even a little thing like the 2-point conversion on Monday night, right? That throw out into the flat. People want to pass interference on that play. If that ball's out a second earlier, they're tying that game and going to OT. And maybe a coin toss away from winning that game. It's, it's frustrating for Giants fans because you're not seeing the progress that you need. And you can blame it on the weapons all you want. But, he threw a horrible pick in the fourth quarter of that game. Like Daniel Jones is hurting the Giants right now, as much as I hate to say it.
Yeah, and again, that just like you said there, with the amount of time he's getting, 3 of the interceptions this season, Jimmy, have been with at least 4 seconds in the pocket to throw. Again, that only trails Carson Wentz, and that's what we're seeing from both Daniel Jones and Carson Wentz. Even when they have time, they're making bad reads. And so that can't happen. If you're a quarterback, your quarterback cannot regress from year 1 to year 2 reading defenses. That just can't happen. So for Daniel Jones, and a lot of this is happening on first and second down, you have another down. Live to play another down. That's all you have to worry about. And again, hero ball is great when it works. When you see Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson do it, it's phenomenal. But again, Daniel Jones, Carson Wentz, those type of quarterbacks, they've shown that they're not built for that. They need to get the ball out of their hands quickly, make their first read, get the ball out, and go from there. And if there's nothing there, throw it away, run, take the sack, do whatever you have to, but by no means should you be turning the ball over. And again, if he wasn't turning the ball over this frequently, Jimmy, it's crazy to say the Giants would be in first place of the NFC East.
Yeah, they would. And at this moment, in recapping this segment, I'm reminded of the words of a pastor when I was on vacation. I used to go down the shore all the time, and we went to Mass on Sunday. And the pastor was an older guy. He talked for a couple minutes in his homily, and he got to the end of it, and he said, that's enough. And in talking about the Jets and the Giants, I think that's enough. So that'll wrap up our talk about those two teams. Talk with Otis Livingston of CBS 2 coming up next. 12:38 a.m., taking you up until 2 here on 90.7. We'll be right back.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
To One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Jimmy Sullivan, Chris Baccia, now pleased to be joined by Otis Livingston. He is the sports director at CBS 2 in New York. You can catch him on the news every night anchoring the local sports. Otis, how are you? Thanks for doing
I'm doing
this.
great. I'm doing great. You can't catch me on Saturdays, though, because I have to have a day off.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Monday through Friday.
What do the days even mean anymore? They all blend together, I feel like.
You know what? 2020 has definitely given us that. You're right.
Well, we appreciate you being here. We've got a lot to get into with New York sports. I think the biggest story right now is New York football and just how bad both teams have been, quite frankly. Chris and I are both Jets fans, so we're kind of partisan in that regard. So let's start with the Jets. They're 0-8.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing the Patriots on Monday Night Football this week. They just have looked absolutely terrible the first half of this season. Yeah. What's the biggest thing that you're looking for out of this team, not just this week, but for the rest of the season, to see if there's anything salvageable out of this season?
Wow, what am I looking for? I mean, I'm looking for competitiveness, man. I mean, they can put together a half sometimes and then not come out of the halftime break inspired. You know, they can't sustain drives, too many 3-and-outs. I mean, it's just a lot of things that you can point to. We got to figure out if Sam Darnold is the quarterback going forward. Obviously, I liked him early on, but, you know, he had that bout with mono last year and then an injury. So this year he's come back. Does he have enough weapons? That's the problem with this team. There are just so many question marks, you know, on both sides of the ball, on special teams as well. This is just one of those situations where you may need a complete overhaul. I mean, Adam Gase as a head coach, I mean, I'm talking about from the top all the way down. It's pretty obvious that he is not the offensive guru that Christopher Johnson said he was. He's coaching where football is going, was that classic line that I don't want to go there. If that's where football is going, I don't want to be anywhere near there, because he's not, you know, showing anything as far as making the quarterback better, putting his quarterback in positions. He's even given up the play calling duties in the last few weeks. You've seen the team has at least come out with some fire and some passion early on, getting points on the board, you know, making you and the rest of the Jet fans feel good about, okay, maybe we can get this game. And then somewhere along the lines, it goes kaput. They can't sustain, like I said, can't sustain drives. You're leaving your defense out on the field an exorbitant amount of time. And when you do that, there's opportunities for teams to score because they're out there too long. You know, we just stopped them. Now we're on the sideline getting a little water. We're back out on the field because you went 3-and-out or turned the ball over. So it's just I don't even know where to begin, because there's so many areas that they need help in. They need improvement in.
At 0-8 and Adam Gase still being there, is it fair to believe that the Jets are trying to lose games? Because at this point, the fact that he's still there, it almost seems like this is a tanking operation. And if that's the case, does that work in football?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I just as a competitor and as an athlete, former athlete myself, I just can't believe a team is going to tank and just try to lose games, because a team is out there. Here's the situation though. Okay. Some of these players are not going to be around next year anyway. What does tanking do for them? Right. Just to get Trevor Lawrence. I'm not even going to be here. I may be out of football because we're not successful. I'm not putting good things out on tape for future teams, you know, for my agent to shop me around. Right. So the players are going to go out, and I believe the players are playing to win. At least the majority of them are playing to win. You know, I just think they don't have enough to win games. You know what I mean? And I believe that, as far as firing Adam Gase, who are you going to replace him with in midseason? Who on that coaching staff are you going to elevate? Because you're not going to bring somebody else in a situation like this where he has 8 games to kind of indoctrinate himself or put his philosophy and culture in place. That's not going to work, So, Greg Williams, a lot of people before the season were speculating if Adam Gase lost his job that Greg Williams was going to be elevated to the head coaching job because he's done that before. But Greg Williams came out this year and pretty much intimated that it's the offense's fault that the defense looks bad. They're putting him in tough positions and stuff like that. You don't want that as a defensive coordinator saying that about your coach, who's the offensive play caller at the time. You know what I mean? So I thought he kind of blew his opportunity, even though that thing was kind of subliminal. I think everyone got the message of what he meant. He's trying, and when you're trying to bring teams, players together, an organization together in a losing atmosphere, you don't want someone who says something that could be incendiary, divisive, or just bad for the guy who's above you.
Talking to Otis Livingston of CBS2 here in New York. All right, Otis, you were talking a little bit before about Sam Darnold, whether or not he's the guy. That is a big question the Jets need to answer. And if they get to the end of the season and they are 1-15, 2-14, or God forbid worse, and they have
16, yeah.
I didn't want to say it out loud, but
I don't either, man. I don't want to see that. I don't. I mean, they're not my favorite team, but I cover them. I have relationships there. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. I want to see them win some games.
Yeah, at least a game. At least
a game. Yeah.
We'll see where that comes. But the way things are going right now, the Jets are in position to have the number 1 pick. And with the number 1 pick probably comes Trevor Lawrence. And that would be a huge decision to make. So, Otis, if the Jets get to that spot and they're the worst team in football, I mean, are you taking Trevor Lawrence? What's the decision there? I feel like that's a really tough spot for the Jets to be in.
I think it's a tough spot, but this guy is a generational quarterback, everyone's saying. This is a guy who can turn around an organization. We saw it a couple years ago, Kyler Murray. Josh Rosen was taken early. They got rid of him with no problem. Obviously, he didn't perform and show what Sam did, because he has shown promise. He has shown that he could be a good quarterback. We just need him to be there now because he's in the 3rd year. If Sam came out and had a great year this year and they still lost games, I think that question would probably be moot. But the fact that he has not really thrived and really been successful, I think that brings this question into, bring this thought into question. Oh man, that's just such a tough decision. What can you get for Sam if you trade him? That has to play in it as well, because you don't want to lose a guy who was the 3rd overall pick in the draft just 3 seasons ago and not get much back for him. So it's a tough decision, but I think that's what Joe Douglas is paid for. That's what the owner and the higher ups who have that power to make that decision, that's for them. I would probably go with Trevor Lawrence, especially if obviously I have to know that he's coming out first, but because he may try to pull that Peyton Manning stuff and go back to college for a senior year, which is his right. But if I knew he was coming out and I knew he was available, can you imagine if he turns out to be like a great quarterback and you passed on him because you wanted to hold on to Sam? You know what I mean? The Jet fans would never forgive the front office for that.
I think we have to imagine that a change will come at head coach when the year is over. But then I think a question that a lot of Jets fans have is, can they trust the general manager? Because this is really not Joe Douglas's team, or at least this is a lot of holdovers from Mike McCagnon, including Sam Darnold. Yeah. So what's your take on Joe Douglas? Is this a guy who can you see him stripping it all down now, but can he build it back up?
Well, I mean, he came from a pretty successful organization in Philadelphia. I think when you sit at someone's side for years, you kind of learn those things, even if it's just by osmosis. But I think that he is dedicated guy. I think that he has an idea of how he wants to build a team, and it's going to take a little bit of time. They have a number of draft picks this year. I mean, I believe in him. I think that he could probably turn this thing around, given some time. Obviously, players have to play too. We've seen guys that have made teams that are supposed to be really good, and players have underperformed. So I believe in Joe Douglas. I think given that time, given that power, which he has, and like you said, he's stripping it down, I think that he'll be able to make those decisions that put the players in the right position. Now, the next head coach, that's another step that he has to be successful in. They can't have this kind of a miss, because this is historically bad what's going on right now in these past 2 years. I mean, they gave you reason to think that at the end of last year, they gave you reason to think that this year could possibly be something. And now we see what it is. There's just the players aren't there. The execution at the right time, they just seem overmatched, man. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they've had like an 8-point loss. Most of their losses during the Adam Gase era is by 2-3 possessions. I mean, this is ridiculous. 24-0 to Miami. I mean, getting blown out. What was the score last week to the Kansas City? I mean, it's just horrible. Half and half. Playing for a quarter looking good, and then the rest of the game you don't even consider that they'll be in it. It's historically bad. They have to get a good head coach in here. They have to establish some kind of culture, the Jet way, whatever that is going to be. And I trust Joe Douglas. I think that he has the wherewithal. I think he has the knowledge to be able to turn this thing around as far as making some of the good decisions that it takes. And then the players, it's up to them.
Otis, you were talking about the Jets' lack of competitiveness, getting blown out in a lot of games. I feel like that is a contrast to what we have seen out of the New York Giants, who, even though they are 1-7, have played a lot of close games. How encouraged are you by the fact that even though they have lost almost 90% of their games so far this year, that most of them have been close and they've had chances to win?
I think you have to be encouraged. I think you have to be encouraged by the fact that they fight, that they compete, that they come down to, the last couple possessions with an opportunity. Where you have to be discouraged is at the quarterback position, though, because if you think about it, those mistakes that he's making, Daniel Jones, have cost them games. I mean, I think earlier this season they had a 19-play drive and he threw an interception in the red zone. You got to cash that in. That's a long drive. You can't come away with nothing. Things like that. The decisions that are being made. I know it's just his second year. I know he's, really starting to get some starts under his belt and everything. But at this point, you would think it'd be better. He has more turnovers than touchdowns. I mean, they have, I think, 7 touchdown passes this year or something like that. It's ridiculous. Like you said, the New York football scene is putrid right now. It's not good. And yeah, I'm encouraged by the head coach, though. I'm a Joe Judge guy. I like him. I think his approach to the game, his attitude, the way he leads, the culture that he's trying to instill in this organization. We still haven't gotten anything official as far as if Golden Tate is being punished for his comments, but man, on the outside, it looks like he's being punished. I mean, he was jettisoned over to the first team practice squad type offense yesterday when they went to team part of the practice. He was over there getting the first team defense ready for this week's game. So he's a no-nonsense coach. I'm encouraged by him. I have confidence in the coaching staff that they have. I think Jason Garrett is doing a good job. It's the quarterback right now. It's, even when they had Saquon Barkley back there, he wasn't getting a lot of yards because defenses are able to key on him, or they're able to, pay close attention to him and say, quarterback, you beat us. And he's not beating them. He's not making those throws. He's overthrowing guys. He's throwing to the wrong guy. He should be throwing the ball out of bounds, and he's throwing it up for grabs where they're getting interceptions and things like that. And that's that's more than just a momentum killer. That's that kills, that brings a team down. You know what I mean? We got a drive, we got an opportunity, and there's a turnover, whether it be a strip sack, fumble, or an interception that's been thrown up for grabs. So there's a lot of things that are wrong with this team. But yeah, I like the fight. I like the fact that they are in these games, that they aren't just getting blown out every week. Tighten up that quarterback play, and you might have something.
So fair to say a little bit more hope on the Giants than the Jets.
Yeah,
but
a lot more.
But a lot more, but still at 1-7, and in a division that is really for the taking at this point. What in the second? This is the worst division in football, worst division that we've ever seen. In the second half, what do we need to see, not just from this team, but from Daniel Jones? It's time for him to not just keep them in games, but actually win some.
Yeah, well, I just spoke about it, man. It's you got to stop making the dumb mistakes. You got to just stop throwing the ball up there. There was a play late in that game against Tampa. He threw the ball away, and everybody exhaled. It was like, which something should be normal, expected. That's your job. It was like, oh, he did it. Oh, thank goodness he threw the ball away. That's elementary, and he's been burned so many times, and he comes into the press conferences, and you got to give him credit because he does own up to it. I got to be better. I got to play smart. I got to do it. Well, when is it going to happen? That's the question. So you need to see that in the second half. And you're exactly right, Chris, that he's got to start winning these games. That's what you're paid to do. You're the franchise quarterback. You're the guy that they're saying, yeah, he's our guy. You got to make these plays. And like you said, this is up for the taking. It's amazing that they are still in it. 1-7. It's a joke. Yeah. So go ahead and be the best of the worst teams.
We've talked about New York football here. It's pretty much all negative. But you cover sports, in and around New York. The other really big story in New York sports right now, Steve Cohen has bought the Mets. He's going to close any day now. He may have by the time this interview airs.
Yeah, it's supposed to be on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were a Mets fan right now, just how excited would you be about this new era in Queens and the prospect of Steve Cohen taking over as the richest owner in baseball?
That part right there is what sells me on it. I mean, right there, and he has a passion for the team. He loves the team. I mean, what better scenario would a Met fan have coming off of what you just had than a guy who's loaded and loves the team, grew up loving the team? He's going to try to do his best to put the best product out there on the field. He went through the glory days of the Mets, right? He also went through the days where it's like, oh man, I can't believe this, what they're putting out there. And as a fan, and you have like almost bottomless pockets, hey, now it's time for him to put up or shut up, because you've been sitting back all those years, killing the team, killing the ownership. Now it's time for you to say, let's turn this thing around. I think if as a Met fan, I would be ecstatic, especially, like I said, coming off of what you just come off. It's polar opposites, where the Wilpons were cash strapped. Unfortunately, I don't, deny that they had a love for the team and they wanted to see it, but maybe they just didn't have the wherewithal. They didn't make the smart decisions as well to put them in that position. We've seen this team, 2015 in the World Series. Let's not forget that. We've always heard about the pitching. We need that pitching staff to stay healthy, first off, and then go out there and perform to the back of your baseball card. Now we need to bring in some free agents. We need to start stocking that farm system, all those sort of things. Put the right people in position. I like Luis Rojas as a manager. I think just him being, how he was raised around the game. I think it's Felipe and Moises Alou and those guys, that's his family. I mean, so he knows the game. Now you need to go out and get those free agents and stock that farm system so you can make trades or you can bring guys up. I think you have, Pete Alonso, Conforto, those guys. Dom Smith had a great year. Jeff McNeil seems like he's a keeper, and the pitching staff obviously is where they hang their hat. You get Noah coming back next year. So, man, I would be on fire. I would definitely be on fire if I was a Met fan.
We'll see how it goes. Certainly a lot of promise. That's Otis Livingston, sports director of CBS2 here in New York. What's up?
That's it? Come on.
Hey, it's, we don't have that much time. I could talk for hours, but
there you go.
You're a busy man. We got to let you get back to work. Otis, we appreciate your time. Best of luck with everything.
My pleasure. Take care, guys. Be safe.
Thanks so much, Otis.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. I'm Sam Davis with Jimmy Sullivan and Andrew Posadas, kicking off the 1 o'clock hour with some headlines. In college football, the Pac-12 has returned to action this weekend, beginning a 7-game season, followed by a Pac-12 championship game happening on December 18th. With the Pac-12 and Big Ten playing shorter seasons, do these conferences have a shot at the playoff, and do they need to be perfect to get there? We'll start with the Big Ten. We'll start with the Pac-12. What do you guys think?
Starting with the Pac-12, I think the answer is no. I mean, here's the thing: the highest ranked team in the Pac-12 right now is at 12 in Oregon. Who are you taking to get to 4? Even if they're undefeated, I really believe that. Not to sound like John King on the magic wall here, but you've got Cincinnati and BYU ahead of Oregon, who are probably going to be favored in the rest of their games, those two teams. I would sooner take those two to have a chance at the college football playoff this year than somebody out of the Pac-12. Because you look at the college football playoff this year, you've got a team from the ACC is going to make it. I think it's going to be Clemson, could be Notre Dame. You've got, the Big 12 is probably out of it. Somebody from the SEC is probably going to make it, at least one, if not two. And then what else do you have? The thing is, I just don't see the Pac-12 as being good enough here. I'm sorry. You could say whatever you want. They have a shortened schedule. They've had 2 games postponed this weekend, but we'll see if those get made up. But even if you do play the whole schedule, it's only a handful of games. They're right over the minimum to get into the college football playoff. But I don't think it's going to come down to that. I just don't honestly believe that any team in the Pac-12 is good enough to be considered one of the 4 best in college football. And that's whether it's 6 games or 12 games or 24 games. It doesn't matter. I just don't think any of those teams in the Pac-12 are good enough right now.
Yeah, here's the problem with Oregon. The only other team ranked in the Pac-12 is USC, and they're at 20. So when you think about teams like Washington, Stanford, UCLA, they're not very good. And this is where not having a non-conference portion of your schedule is going to kill Oregon. Because even if they play all 7 games, they win the Pac-12 championship game, and they go 8-0. I don't think that resume, if you stack that up with a BYU or a Cincinnati or even a team that has 1 loss, let's say a Clemson, we were talking about Clemson, should they lose, if they were to potentially lose to Notre Dame, I don't think you're going to put an undefeated Oregon against the likes of those teams from the ACC, like a Clemson, or from the SEC, as a matter of fact. So again, I just think for Oregon, it's going to be tough sledding. They're going to need a lot of teams ahead of them to lose, and they're going to need other conferences to really just beat up on each other, Sam, because without that and no good non-conference games that they can hang their hats on, aside from their conference game with USC, and we don't know if USC even stays ranked if they were to lose or stumble up to that point. So again, for Oregon, it's going to be tough sledding, but I'm with Jimmy. I just don't see how the Pac-12 gets a representative in the college football playoff this season.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said, Andrew. Oregon's strength of schedule is just not great, and definitely playing only in the conference definitely hurts their chances. I think it's asking a lot out of Oregon. First of all, they have to go undefeated, which is not easy. I don't care, how easy your schedule may be. Winning every game and being perfect, certainly not easy. They have to win the Pac-12 championship. They also have to look really good doing so. I think if the committee's ever going to give them a nod at that 4 spot, they have to pass the eye test that they call it. They have to look very dominant against such an easy schedule. I think that's a whole lot to ask out of this team. But I do want to bring up a little bit of a counterpoint here. And you mentioned the Big 12 here. And I think them being down, kind of having a down year, Oklahoma State lost. It looks like no team in the Big 12 is going to represent that conference. I think that does help the Pac-12. A lot kind of has to happen in order for a 4 spot to be open for a team like Oregon. Maybe Notre Dame has to be out of the question. Maybe Georgia has to be out of the question, limiting the teams in the SEC and ACC to 1 representative. And then you add in maybe an Ohio State. It could open the door potentially for a Pac-12 team. I'm not going to say that the chances are completely out the window. I think there's a slight chance just based off the fact that it's unpredictable and there's a long way to go in the season. Obviously, Pac-12 just starting this week. It's a long way to go. I don't like the odds. I wouldn't bet on them, but I think there is maybe a slight chance that a team like Oregon could maybe sneak into a 4 spot there, but who knows?
Yeah, and it's tough. There's not a lot of paths through this thing for the Pac-12. Let's just be honest. I mean, there aren't a lot of good teams. The ones that are good have to go undefeated. It's not easy. It's going to be very hard. And, you look at other conferences, they have more options, at least, of teams. And you brought up the Big Ten. So let's get into the Big Ten. Their easiest path to the playoff is just Ohio State running the table. If it's not Ohio State, somebody else, but I don't know who else it's going to be. Indiana's undefeated right now. They're good, but they're not at that level. Michigan obviously is gone. So there's nobody else in that conference. Wisconsin lost a couple of games to COVID. So, we don't know to the extent that they're going to be able to make that up. So I guess they're probably out of the equation at this point too. I think Ohio State, I actually picked Ohio State before the season to win it all. And I am sticking with that. Justin Fields is probably the Heisman frontrunner right now with Trevor Lawrence being out. So you got to take Ohio State. If you're going to take anybody out of the Big Ten, you got to go with the Buckeyes. And that gives the Big Ten not only the best chance of getting to the playoff, but the best chance of winning a championship. So I think the Big Ten will get somebody on the virtue of Ohio State being so good this season. And I think they're going to run the table and they're going to be the representative for the Big Ten in the playoff.
Yeah, people can't see right now if you're listening on the radio, but our producer, Alex Walls, is wearing a beautiful zip-up sweater right there from Oregon. And he wasn't too pleased with what we're saying, but I think he knows that we're half right. I mean, that the Pac-12 just isn't strong enough. But again, if they can get teams in other conferences to keep losing like the Big 12, we could see that in the SEC and the Big 10 where teams are getting upset, then maybe that does open the door. But if you're the Pac-12, you are just hoping that a team like USC doesn't slip up against Arizona State. And you're hoping teams like a Washington or Stanford can win a few games and just get into the top 25, because the more ranked teams you can have in the top 25, the better that resume for Oregon will look if they do indeed run the table, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State definitely has a lot more credit, and I think the Big Ten's a stronger conference as a whole compared to the Pac-12, so that plays into something for the committee too. I mean, Ohio State has been pretty dominant so far, and they've looked very good. So if they run the table and they win out, certainly they'll make it 100%. Even if they lose a game here in the regular season, I think winning the Big Ten championship might still set them up to probably sneak in as like a 4 seed or something like that. I think even a 1-loss Ohio State, I would see the committee valuing that more than an undefeated Oregon team. And I don't know. I don't see Ohio State losing. I don't see them losing. I think they're going to run the table, but I think the committee definitely values the Big Ten in that conference a lot more than they do the Pac-12, and we'll see how things play out. Not so sure. We will see. So next here, sticking with college football, 47 games have been impacted by COVID-19 so far this season. 10 games have been postponed or canceled in week 10 alone in this week. 4 from Power 5 conferences like the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and even the ACC. What are you guys' thoughts on this? And will these changes impact the college football playoff?
They will impact the college football playoff. How is the question? Is it going to be, I would even argue that coronavirus could, impact the college football playoff, in the sense of what we're going to see with, Clemson and Notre Dame, right? That's not a game that got canceled, but still that's a direct effect. And, you listed the numbers with the 47 games, the 10 games this week, it's what we kind of thought was going to happen going into this season. As terrible as that sounds, it's almost felt inevitable. And if you were going to have a college football season this year, you were going to have to accept a certain level of what we have seen. And but getting back to the playoff here, it's fascinating. I mean, I would argue COVID already had even before the season with the short schedules and teams, playing not playing out of conference basically. And you brought up the point about week 10. It doesn't feel like week 10. It feels like week 4. It doesn't feel like we've been at this for the usual amount of time, because some conferences started in early September, the Big Ten started in mid-October, and the Pac-12 started today. So, it doesn't feel like your regular college football season. Usually at this point, you're like, okay, these are the good teams, these are the bad teams, these are the teams that are going to be in the playoff. I have no idea about any of that stuff so far this year, but what I do know is that this season is going to end come hell or high water, because the NCAA has 2 chief moneymakers, March Madness and the college football playoff. They're not losing both of them within the span of 10 months. It's just not going to happen. So I think they're getting to the finish line here. They're going to have the playoff. We've decided that. But the question is, if, for example, right, we get to championship weekend, it's the Big Ten title game. Ohio State, let's just say Ohio State, Wisconsin, for argument's sake, in the Big Ten. Before that game, Ohio State has some kind of a positive test or an outbreak. They can't play that game. How does that affect things? I mean, that's a hypothetical, but we literally saw 10 days ago in the World Series a guy get pulled in the middle of the game who had coronavirus. So it sounds like a crazy hypothetical, but it's not. I'll be interested to see how it progresses moving forward. The disease growth in the country is incredibly concerning, and I can't imagine that is not going to affect college football in the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, this one's tough for me, just because when you talk about responsibility for these athletes amid the pandemic, and we know on the professional level, guys are obviously making money and they understand what's at stake if they were to contract it or if a season doesn't finish because of the pandemic. But these guys at the end of what, they're 18 to 22-year-olds. And I think that's the thing. They're not only just, playing games. Some of these universities are still open for classes on campus. And a lot of these players are on campus around other students, and they can't control what those students are doing with their time. So I think for the athletes, it's tough because our student athletes aren't being as protected as I think the NCAA should be protecting them. And again, when you have some of these places like Florida, like Texas A&M, where their stadiums are at half capacity and their student section is jammed, and there's people who aren't socially distant, and there's people just breaking protocols, that is only that is just a mirror of what I think the student athletes feel like. Hey, if we're seeing the fans out there having fun and enjoying themselves, why can't we enjoy ourselves too after these games and going out and celebrating? I think that's the thing too. I don't think coaches and these programs are doing enough to make sure that, hey, our players aren't putting themselves in position to contract the virus or be in situations that they shouldn't be in. And again, and how much can you ask of a student athlete? Again, you're not paying these athletes to play these games. So I think that there really is a line that the NCAA is trying to just balance, where they're as Jimmy said, getting to the college football playoff. Can we finish, get that, and get our revenue how we can? Or are we going to say, hey, for us, it doesn't matter if, by the end of the season, over 250 players have contracted the virus. I think the NCAA has made it quite clear that they're just trying to get to the finish line, and anybody who doesn't make it to the finish line, it really isn't their problem because they're not trying to do enough. Sam, it just doesn't feel like there's being enough stringent protocols for each program. I think the NCAA is leaving it to each program, and we're seeing that some programs are taking it a bit seriously, and some programs are still a bit lenient.
Yeah, and go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
No, you go first.
Okay, yeah. So I was just going to say quickly, I had seen a report right before Wisconsin's first game against Illinois on the Friday night that the Big Ten started. People were very concerned about students going out to bars, partying, doing dumb stuff after the game. They were worried about that being a super spreader event. The super spreader event did not happen in the bars that night. It happened at Camp Randall, and there were no fans there. And it was, Wisconsin within a week having, a positive test count in the 20s. So, the mere act of playing these games, if somebody has it, is dangerous. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. Sam, I'm sorry I cut you off, but I felt like that was an important point.
No problem. I think what Andrew said is a great point. And in college football and college sports in general, I think a lot of people forget that these are young athletes. They're young 18 to 21-year-old men and women. And it's a lot to put on these guys' shoulders in not only being responsible themselves, but also the fact that they can't control other people around them not being responsible, especially when they're on campus at college, which I assume most of these athletes are. So that's certainly something that I didn't even really think of. And that's definitely something to look at and pay attention to. I think it's important. It's definitely concerning, but I'm also looking at the MLB. I'm looking at the NFL in the past. They've dealt with their fair share of issues with COVID-19. They've had plenty of cancellations, and they've been able to kind of work through it and find a way to finish the season. I mean, the NFL not yet, but it seems like they're certainly on track to finish the season like the MLB did. So that's definitely a positive I think we can look at here and kind of frame this whole situation into reference, because sure, right now the situation is definitely very bad, and maybe something needs to be done by these programs to ensure that the athletes are safe and can play the season. But I think the college football is not going to stop, and they need this revenue. They need this money, like you said, Jimmy. I think they're going to do whatever it takes to get to that finish line. It's definitely a hurdle that they're going to have to work around, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to be able to get past that and get to the finish line. And what we all want to see is a college football playoff in which every team has a chance, and something that we love to see at the end of the year.
Yeah, we'll see if that winds up coming through. Also seems like maybe, we could be close to a vaccine. You get different reports every day. So hopefully we're not dealing with this very far into the future, what with, the virus and its effects. So obviously you wish the best to everybody who's dealing with it. And that goes for college football as well. Also worth noting in this discussion, not having to do with college football, Fordham Athletics this past week had its first positive case It was a member of the men's basketball program. They didn't say who. They didn't say what the role was. Since then, everything has seemed to be okay. Haven't heard of any new positives there. We wish that individual, whoever they may be, the best as well. Sam, good stuff. We'll talk to you at the end of the show. Coming up next, a pair of big college football games this weekend. Got another 40 minutes here on One-on-One, taking you up until 2 a.m. We'll be right back.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. Andrew Posadas, Jimmy Sullivan with you. You just heard from Sam Davis on the headlines. We'll have him back on for our final segment of the show, taking you up until 2 a.m. here in the East. And great to be with you here on this Saturday night. And we've got a pair of college football games to discuss, Andrew. 2 top 10 matchups. One in the SEC, one in the ACC, which I'll admit takes a little calibrating considering that Notre Dame has kind of been an honorary member of the ACC for the past few years in football. And just for this year has assumed the mantle as a full ACC member. Not sure how you go back to being an independent after that, but we'll see. Let's start with Clemson, Notre Dame, 1-4. Clemson without Trevor Lawrence tonight. It's DJ Uiagalelei tonight. He was terrific last week against Boston College. Andrew, this is a fascinating game. I'm greatly looking forward to it. And it's at South Bend. I was talking with Andrew Galata about this week. I feel like most of Clemson's regular season big games of the last 5 years or so have been at home. That's a conspiracy theory. I don't have any hard data to back that up, but I'm going with it. It's true. I've decided that it's true. But Andrew, nonetheless, looking forward to this one.
Yeah, and you made a great point in our headline segment just now with Sam Davis when you mentioned the fact that it's not really so much the games that are canceled or postponed that had the biggest effect on the college football playoff, but the players that can't play in certain spots. And without Trevor Lawrence, if you're Clemson, you're going in, even as good as DJ Uiagalelei has been, you are going in with the hand tied behind your back without the reigning Heisman and the prohibitive #1 pick in this upcoming NFL draft. So again, if Clemson were to lose to Notre Dame, and there's a possibility they can, and there's a possibility that Alex Walls will be correct in his guarantee about the Fighting Irish. For Clemson, I guess they could sit back on the fact that they could see them again down the road in the ACC championship game. But Jimmy, if you're Clemson and you lose tonight, and then you don't end up making the playoff because of this loss, and let's say Notre Dame wins out and they take one of those 4 spots, I think a team like Clemson would have a huge gripe with the NCAA by saying, hey, we lost our best player, and when he came back, if they run the table and they end, 9-1, they're going to be pointing to that and saying, hey, that one loss was without our best player. We should still be in the playoff. So again, a lot of ramifications if Clemson does indeed lose. But that's interesting you say that, though, that a lot of their big games are in Death Valley, because I feel the same way. I remember that game against Louisville with Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson going back and forth. That was in Death Valley. So while you don't have any evidence, I think we've seen in this country that people can still make outrageous claims without any evidence whatsoever. So, Jimmy, I can't knock you for that. I think there might be something to it. But if you're Notre Dame, this is your chance. If you can take Clemson out tonight, your path is clear. It is a yellow brick road to the CFB. So for the Fighting Irish, they're going to take all their gold, put it in the pot, and see if they can make their way to the CFB, and it starts tonight.
And let's also be real. This is not, the true road game, full-fledged environment. It's not going to be that. Notre Dame has some fans, but not anywhere near capacity. So it's not going to be, headed into a rocky environment. I think the biggest road game I can remember for Clemson, they played there were a couple in 2017. They played Louisville on the road, knocked them around, and then they played Virginia Tech. And people overhyped that game because Virginia Tech just was not square for that at all. And it was a rocking environment, and Virginia Tech comes in with Enter Sandman, and everybody loses their mind. That's not happening here tonight. Okay, that's nothing against Notre Dame. It's just 2020. There are limitations on how crazy you can get. We're not going to see that tonight. We're not going to see that for the rest of this year, whether that's at Notre Dame or anywhere else. That being said, you've got a primetime game that a lot of the country is watching, particularly now that other things in America have been settled. And, it's a huge pressure environment for a young quarterback. And that's where I go to DJ Uiagalelei. And is he square? Is he in a good position for this moment? My argument would be yes. I think we saw him last week. He was terrific in that game. Everybody was going into that game thinking Clemson's going to have to win this in spite of him. Quite the opposite. He was tremendous, and that was a big part of the reason why Clemson won that game, because their defense gave up a lot of yards, particularly in the first half, and then the second half they really took over. But I think he's going to be ready for this, and I look forward to seeing what he can do against this Notre Dame defense, and I think this is a big part of why I feel good about Clemson tonight, is watching that last week and seeing how he fared. So I think he's going to be able to do it again.
Yeah, and when you factor in that there's going to be a limited capacity for a freshman, that's big, because you're not feeling that atmosphere that you would if South Bend was rocking on a Saturday night. You're not having to feel that. So for DJ Uiagalelei, he has that opportunity where he doesn't have to worry about the fans, and Dabo is going to put him in a position where the throws are going to be easy, a lot of running plays, because what he showed against BC is that he can beat you up the middle. He is 6'5", 250 plus maybe. I mean, just a big body, and Dabo used him perfectly, especially in the second half, just running it down Boston College's throat. So again, if you're Clemson, you got to keep it simple for DJ, make things, I don't want to use the word vanilla, but keep the offensive scheme simple enough where he can at least execute, play in, play out. And we know that Clemson defense is going to be ready to roll, and they're always ready. So again, as bad of a spot as people would think not having Trevor Lawrence that Clemson is in right now, they aren't really. They have the talent. They have a great quarterback who was a top 10 recruit out of his class. So again, Dabo still has enough to beat Notre Dame. And I think that just says a lot about what Clemson has been able to do. Much like Alabama, their second and third stringers, Jimmy, are just 4- and 5-star athletes. So it's really easy to plug in and put guys in when you have those type of recruits year in and year out. So for Clemson, they still have enough to win this game easily. But for Notre Dame, this is your best chance to make a statement and say, hey, we're not really part of the ACC in football, but the 1 year that we're in the conference, we can steal it away and then go back to being an independent and always have that hanging over the ACC conference that when we were in, we won the championship.
Yeah, I think this is statement time for Notre Dame and statement time for Brian Kelly. Like, let's be honest about that too. He has, I think, probably a worse perception in big games than what the reality is. Not that the reality is good, but this is a Notre Dame team. He got them to the national title game in 2012. To his everlasting credit, they got hammered by Alabama. He got them to the college football playoff in 2018. They went to the semifinal, got hammered by Clemson. And part of that, let's just be real, is that there is a gulf between Clemson and Alabama, and last year it was LSU, and the rest of the sport. It's just the fact of the matter. But at some point, you got to go out there and you got to win a big game. And this is as good a chance as they've had. You're at home. You've got Clemson without their starting quarterback, who is the best player in America. And you have it's in front of you right now. You win this game, you win out, you're going to go to the college football playoff, and you could be ranked number one. Like, that's not an insane proposition, if Alabama were to trip up at some point. So it's in front of Notre Dame, but I've got questions about them offensively. Can Ian Book do enough for them? I don't know what the answer to that is, but I still think Clemson's more talented. That's just where I come at it. And to tip my hand here, that's why I'm going to pick Clemson, because I just feel a lot better about their overall talent level.
Well, my heart wants Alex Walls to win this bet, but my mind is telling me that DJ Uyangale is going to have a good game, and Clemson's going to end up winning by double digits. Just because, when you think about Brian Kelly, I think about that Alabama and that national championship game, and everyone's talking about, all right, Notre Dame is back, and Brian Kelly has brought him back to prominence. They're going to be here year in and year out. They get smoked by Alabama, and I just don't think that program has been the same since. And you're right, Brian Kelly, the perception for big games for him, it's going to land on tonight. If he can win tonight, that perception changes. And if he doesn't, then I think people, amongst, Notre Dame fans, alumni, boosters, they might start wondering to themselves, is Brian Kelly really it? This guy doesn't win us the big games when we need it. Do we really need him at the helm moving forward? I think for him, it might be make or break, considering whatever happens going forward. If they were to lose and Notre Dame again loses another big game, I just don't know how long Notre Dame can stay with Brian Kelly, because as we know, this is a program that's built on dominance that's won in the past, and that hasn't been the case. And when they were there, they got blown out. So for Brian Kelly, huge ramifications if he doesn't win tonight, I think.
I will say I'm also taking Clemson. So our producer, Alex Walls, has Notre Dame. Sam Davis has Notre Dame. You and I, Andrew, both have Clemson. And I think I will say the perception's a little unfair on Brian Kelly. Let's remember, this is a Notre Dame program that is 2 coaches removed from Tyrone Willingham. So, that you could say what you want. And yes, they have not shaped up in big games. I will grant you that. But you also have to remember where Notre Dame was before this. And it wasn't nowhere, but it also was not great. And they weren't, in contention in big games. The best year I could think of before Brian Kelly was probably 2005, the year with the Bush push. So I think I think that perception's a little unfair because of what Brian Kelly has done in terms of they play a good schedule. That's obviously part of it, but also I think it is a little unfair to him because they've built a good program. I feel like they are consistently in better shape now than they were 10 years ago. That being said, though, the perception is on Brian Kelly. I don't think it's going to change tonight. I think Clemson's going to go out there, get the victory. All right, quickly over to the world's largest cocktail party, Florida, Georgia. And I'm going to preface this with a great quote I heard on Friday by Gabriel Sterling. He is a Georgia elections official, and he has just inadvertently wandered into the epicenter of the political universe, which is obviously another story. But we're not talking about the runoffs. We're talking about what he said yesterday. So he's talking about Georgia, which is headed for a recount in the presidential election, which at the end of the day probably will not be terribly important. But he said, Everybody's exhausted. It's Friday. There's a Georgia game tomorrow. It's a really big one. We have to focus on the important things sometimes. Could not agree more, Gabriel Sterling. Well said. Say it for everybody in the back. Tremendous stuff. But I agree with them. Sometimes you have to focus on the really important things. And this is a really important game for both of these teams.
Priorities, people, priorities. I mean, I know we all want to worry about who's going to be the next elected president of the United States. But again, Florida, Georgia, you can't miss out on that. And that just goes to show you, Jimmy, we don't, here in New York, we don't have that where we have a college football program that is worried that much about a game that they're willing to stop counting ballots. That's how important it is in the SEC and in states like Georgia and Florida. But I will say this. I don't want to say I'm actively rooting against Florida, but I'm actively rooting against Dan Mullen. He has just rubbed me so wrong this season, just the way he's handled the pandemic and trying to incite fans to be at full capacity in the Swamp. And then after that brawl at halftime last week, coming back out and kind of cheering the fans on and basically endorsing that type of play and that type of behavior from his players. I think the biggest L so far in the college football world, amongst other things, has to go to Dan Mullen. I think he's went about this season entirely the wrong way. And if Florida loses, I won't lose any sleep. And if Dan Mullen loses out the rest of the season, we can just be clear, I won't feel any sort of empathy for him whatsoever. I think he's kind of just made the wrong statement on how college football should go about having fans, whether it be in a limited capacity. Dan Mullen really is take a big L. I mean, I'm done. I prefer Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart is a man's man, does what he has to do. The old-fashioned coach, if you will. And for me, Dan Mullen, if he loses out, Jimmy, I won't lose a wink of sleep.
Yeah, it is interesting. And, Dan Mullen made the comments about the crowd. I remember it was after a really tough loss to Texas A&M. Texas A&M had basically a full house. Not like they were supposed to, but they did. And he was upset about that. And then Florida, I think, lost their next 2 games. They didn't wind up playing them because of COVID. So, obviously people took glee in that part of it. And obviously you didn't, Andrew, but, people did take glee in the outbreak at Florida, which I thought was totally wrong. That being said, Dan Mullen is having a weird one this year. Okay. He calls for 89,000 at Ben Hill Griffin. He incites a brawl last week. I mean, you see the video of him right in the referee's face. He doesn't have a mask on. So yeah, it's bad. The way he has gone about his business is concerning. On the field, I'm going to take Georgia. And I think, there's offensive concerns for Georgia. They scored 14 points last week against Kentucky. Their defense is really good, though. And I think that's going to be enough to get them over the edge in this game. And this bizarre season for Florida. And I think about the roller coaster they have been on in the last month or so. They lose to A&M. They have the COVID outbreak. They don't play 2 games. They have the fight against Mizzou last week, which was a big one. And, Dan Mullen, as you said, Andrew, not comporting himself in an exemplary manner. And it's concerning to see in terms of the on the field and strictly on that basis. I'm going with Georgia. Andrew, I get the sense are taking Georgia as well.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, that outbreak, Florida is not going to be 100% going into that game. And for Georgia, we haven't heard any reports from them. You mentioned that defense, Kirby Smart will always have them focused and ready to go. And as long as Stetson Bennett doesn't turn the ball over, as long as he doesn't throw picks or make any mistakes, Georgia should win that game handily. And I think for Florida, that outbreak, I think really is going to be a backbreaker for them because they won't be at 100% for a few more weeks. And by then it may be too late for them to make a run to perhaps even, forget the CFB, but to even get to the SEC championship. This is a must win for them, being in the SEC East with Georgia. They got to win this game and not being at 100%. I think that's going to be their downfall. And I expect Georgia to win today.
I'm going with Georgia as well. I mean, let's be real. Florida may never be at 100%. Even the guys who come back. I mean, we've seen Cam Newton, who looks grotesque since he came back from COVID. He looks slow. He's not getting air on the football. that's just one example. We've seen other athletes say like it took them months to get back to what they felt was 100%. So not saying that's going to happen here, but it's a possibility. So that's what we've got this week. Hey, sometimes you just got to focus on the important things. 20 minutes left to go in our show. Sam Davis joins us next, going through some NFL awards at the halfway point of the season. Taking you up until 2 a.m. here on One on One. We'll be right back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
I'm Sam Davis alongside Jimmy Sullivan and Andrew Posadas, back here with our NFL midseason awards. We're going to start with the Defensive Player of the Year. I'll start with Jimmy. Let's hear your pick, Defensive Player of the Year.
There are a bunch of good options here. I don't say this to disrespect anybody. There's a lot of great defensive players in this league. I'm not overthinking this one. It's Aaron Donald. There is one guy in this league that you have to plan everything around defensively, and it's him. Every offense that goes against the Rams this season, and the years before as well, has to plan their game plan knowing, oh, we're going to get wrecked by Aaron Donald unless we throw 2 or 3 offensive linemen at him. So you can look at the numbers and you could look at other guys and say, yeah, they deserve it, and they do. But in terms of the amount of impact he has from his spot on that defensive line, with offensive lines planning, for at least a week just around him, that's why I go with Aaron Donald over somebody like a TJ Watt, for example, who's gotten a lot of run in recent days. So to me, it's Aaron Donald because he has such a singular effect on the opposing team's game plan every single week.
I can understand Aaron Donald. He's kind of like LeBron James, where every year you could give him the defensive player or even the MVP if you wanted because of that impact. But I'm going to go a little bit, not out of left field, but it's close. I'm going to go with Budda Baker. And I will say this. He signed that 4-year, $59 million extension back in August. And a lot of times we expect players, when they sign that big money, that they kind of have a lull or a little bit of a down year because, they got paid. They don't need anything else. But Budda Baker, he's top 10 in solo tackles. He's top 10 in interceptions, add a couple of sacks. He is everywhere on that field. He really is the catalyst for that Arizona defense and what they want to do. You can line him up just about anywhere on the field, and he makes an impact. Aside from getting caught from DK Metcalf, that might be his only low light of the season. But again, DK Metcalf is a gazelle who is 260 pounds. But again, I think for what Budda Baker's been doing, especially considering he got paid and he could have been complacent after getting his money, he is really showing that he is worth all $59 million that the Cardinals extended him for. And I think right now, if they had to call it, I think Budda Baker has a big, big argument for winning Defensive Player of the Year.
I'm going to go against both of you here. I've got the guy who is tied for the league lead in sacks with Aaron Donald. It's Myles Garrett from Cleveland. I think he's got 9 sacks. Obviously, is very impressive. He also has forced 4 fumbles. Still got a whole half of the season to go. He's looked very impressive over there in Cleveland, and that team is competitive right now. And if they stay competitive, I like Myles Garrett from the Browns for Defensive Player of the Year. But also, you guys both great points there. Next, we have Offensive Player of the Year. This time, I'm going to go to Andrew. Offensive Player of the Year. Who you got?
Yeah, this one is simple for me. It's Aaron Rodgers. I mean, when you think about it, he's first in QBR, 88 right now, 24 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Both those interceptions were against Tampa Bay, and which was his only down game. Other than that, I mean, they lost to Minnesota too, but he still had a good game, had 3 touchdowns, no picks. And when you think about it, 68% completion percentage. Aaron Rodgers, to me, because the NFL does Defensive and Offensive Player of the Year, Aaron Rodgers could win the Offensive Player of the Year each and every year. He's always that efficient. People say he had a down year last year, and I think he was like 26-2, and that's a down year for Aaron Rodgers. So again, at the pace that he's at, you know he's going to put up numbers. He can throw to Aaron Jones. Devontae Adams is becoming the best wide receiver in football. With that offense, I think Aaron Rodgers, he's going to keep stat padding. His stats are only going to go up, and I think that Packers offense is going to finish top 5. So I would say right now, Aaron Rodgers, offensively, the player of the year.
Yeah, nothing like a death march against your own front office, right? It's just incredible. Yeah, I looked a little differently for this, maybe overthinking it a little. I tried to go outside of the quarterback position, which may be wrong in a year like this. I'm going to take Derrick Henry on the Titans. This is the guy who's leading the league in rushing, has more carries than anybody else in the league, and has played 1 less game than a lot of these guys. He's on pace for nearly 2,000 yards. And similar to Aaron Donald, on the offensive side, you plan your entire game plan around him. And you don't see many non-quarterbacks who have that going for them. But he does in Tennessee. So I have gone with Derrick Henry for the singular impact he has from the running back position and for the fact that nobody in this league can tackle him. That helps too.
As much as I want to take a guy outside of the quarterback position, I can't. I have to go with Aaron Rodgers as well, Andrew. He's been given no help at the wide receiver position outside of Devontae Adams, and he doesn't even need it. He's had an amazing first half, 24 touchdowns, like you said, only 2 picks. He's just kind of the obvious pick for me personally. I think he's had an amazing start, and he's going to keep having a great year over there in Green Bay. Next, we have rookies. We're going to start with the defense. So the defensive rookie of the year, Jimmy, who is it?
Yeah, a couple of good options here. I like the way Chase Young's been playing in Washington. I'm going with him. He's the number 2 pick for a reason. He is a guy who is going to be the cornerstone of either that defense or another defense for years to come. And he has really impressed me in the first 7 games of his career. I loved him out of Ohio State. And I think, what we've seen from him, I thought he was the best player in this draft overall. And I really still do believe that. And I think the potential for his career is just limitless. So Chase Young gets Defensive Rookie of the Year for me.
Yeah, if Chase Young hadn't missed almost half of the season so far, I'd probably be with you, Jimmy. But I'm going to go again. Maybe this is left field, but I'm going to go to Carolina and the rookie safety, Jeremy Chin. A lot of people spoke about Isaiah Simmons coming into this draft as a safety who you could put at linebacker, could be around the field, versatile, could fit any scheme. And while that was what Isaiah Simmons was touted to be, we're seeing that from Jeremy Chin in Carolina. I mean, they're putting him at safety, at linebacker. He's 10th right now in tackles combined, 67. Add a pick there with him this season too. I just think his versatility, he's a guy who's just been productive, just slowly chugging along. And I think if he keeps the pace, nobody's really talking about Carolina. But again, at the pace he's at tackles wise, I think he's going to get to over 100 combined tackles. And I think he's really going to be one of those steals where we look back at this past draft, he is one of those steals, and Carolina got him in the 2nd round.
Yeah, everyone's looking at Chase Young, and rightfully so. It was hard for me to look past him, but I'm also going to go off of that. I'm going to go with the linebacker from the Baltimore Ravens, Patrick Queen, another rookie, kind of under the radar a little bit. He's definitely been very versatile for them. 2 sacks 2 fumbles forced and 2 recovered as well. And he's got 48 tackles too, only halfway through the season. So I'm going to take Patrick Queen over there in Baltimore. They've had a nice year, and so is he. Next, staying with the rookies, we're going to now look at the offensive side of the ball. So offensive rookie of the year, Andrew, you start. Who do you have?
This one's a simple, Ed. We all should agree on it. It's Joey B, the man in Cincinnati, Joe Burrow. I mean, come on now. He's third in passing yards right now. He's first in attempts and completions. And we talk about Aaron Rodgers doing it in spite of what he has in Green Bay. Joe Burrow's the same thing. They have no offensive line. They have a few pieces there at the wide receiver position. The running back position right now is a revolving door with Mixon and Bernard being injury prone. And you think about that Cincinnati defense, Joe Burrow has had so much that he's had to withstand. But again, Cincinnati has been competitive in most of their games. And that's a credit to Joey B. Jimmy, Joe Burrow, he's got to be the offensive rookie of the year, right?
I'm going to give a little love to Justin Herbert, and then I'm going to give the award to Joe Burrow. Justin Herbert's having a great year. He's been tremendous. That team has also found every way to lose. And that also has to be part of the calculus. Not like the Bengals have been great. Don't get me wrong. But, yeah, it's Joe Burrow. And you talked about the running back position. Joe Mixon had a couple of good games, then he got hurt, which is extremely frustrating for Team Sullivan, but that's neither here nor there. But he's been terrific. He was terrific again last week. He's been playing great football. And he's the guy in Cincinnati. There's no question about that. He will be going forward. When you get the number 1 pick, the point of it usually is to make right on it. The Jets and Giants are dealing with issues along that end right now where they each had top 10 picks in the draft and, might be looking at moving on at some point from the picks that they made. Not so in Cincinnati. Joe Burrow is the guy. And he made a throw at the end of that game last week to clinch it for him, where he had the receiver going on a quick slant and he was heading towards the defender. So he threw it back to the outside, got him away from the defender, made the catch, won the game. It's little things like that. He just gets it. Like he came out of LSU. He was 23 years old. He's older than Lamar Jackson, by the way, which is very low key. But, he came out of college and people were saying, oh, how much can he develop? But he just gets it at such a high level right now that he doesn't need to do as much development. So he's really good. He's got a bad team around him, but I think he's making do with that. And yeah, he's just been terrific for Cincinnati. And as much as I love Justin Herbert, as much as I may want to give it to him, it's Joe Burrow. Andrew's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting comparison between Herbert and Burrow because they're both on teams that are very not very good, 2-5, and they're both definitely playing very well and shining on those teams and making them even fun to watch. But I got to go with Joe Burrow here. I got to stick with you guys as well. As much as I want to go against the grain, I think Joe Burrow has it. He's won his whole career, and sure, the Bengals aren't winning necessarily, but he's winning and he's playing well. He's going to probably lock up this award. So I'm going to give Joe Burrow the slight edge there. And I want to bring up a quote he said here. He said, quote, he's just scratching the surface of his potential. And I think that's even true. I don't even know how much higher he can go. Maybe bring the Bengals or whatever organization he ends up with to some playoff victories. We'll see down the road. But I think Burrow is a strong candidate for that offensive rookie of the year. Now we got coaches. So coach of the year, Jimmy, who's the coach of the year?
I'm trying not to reinvent the wheel here. I'm going to go with Mike Tomlin. This is a team that is undefeated. If we all took bets at the beginning of the season and said, who's going to be the last team in the NFL to be undefeated, I don't think any of us would have said the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, you thought maybe they could be pretty good with their defense. But, this is a team that's just clicking on all cylinders. Right. You've got Ben Roethlisberger, an older quarterback, but, still has something left in the tank. A defense that's absolutely tremendous, led by Minkah Fitzpatrick. Shout out New Jersey high school football. And this is a team that, look, I don't think they're the best team in the AFC. I think if they play a team like the Chiefs in the playoffs, that's not a good matchup for them. But you have to give them a ton of credit. I didn't even think they were going to win that game last week against Baltimore, and they were able to shut down Lamar Jackson. So, yeah, you have to give Mike Tomlin a ton of credit. No Le'Veon Bell, no Antonio Brown on this roster, and they're flourishing. And, you could argue that maybe he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for dealing with, some of the stuff he dealt with, particularly with Antonio Brown, to be clear. But Yeah, it's Mike Tomlin, and just doing an unbelievable job, and he's got that team in position to maybe make some noise in the postseason.
Yeah, I'm with Jimmy 100%. It has to be Mike Tomlin. And it's crazy. In his 14-year career, Mike Tomlin has never had a record under 500. He's had 3 12-4 seasons and 1 13-3 season, yet he's never won Coach of the Year. That to me is baffling and confusing. I thought much like Russell Wilson, you would think they'd already have the hardware, but yet he's never won Coach of the Year. And as Jimmy mentioned, no AB, no Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, Big Ben is kind of basically a shell of what he once was. And even amid all that, he's still been able to draft well, have that defense back to being top tier. And that offense does just enough with some of the talent that they have at wide receiver to put up enough points to get them those wins. Mike Tomlin, give him his flowers. He deserves it. If there's going to be any year where we need to give him that recognition, it should be this year. The only unbeaten team left, it's definitely got to be Mike Tomlin.
I hate to go against this because you guys are making great points here and the Steelers have been playing well, but I am going to go against it. I'm going to take Brian Flores with the Dolphins. I think he's had certainly an impressive year there. The team was 5-11 a year ago. They already have 4 wins this year. Honestly, I think if they can find a way to win 8 or 9 games, which is not really out of the question because I'm looking at their schedule, they have certainly a good amount of winnable games in the second half of their schedule. If they can get to that 8 or 9 wins, that's a huge win for the Dolphins this year. They're second in the AFC East. Obviously, the Patriots are down this year, so that might be part of why. But still, you can't go against Flores here. I really like the way he's done with this team. He's reinvigorated that team. He's made them relevant again after a tough season last year. I think if they win 8 or 9 games, I want to give him the slight edge over Mike Tomlin. But obviously, Tomlin's a great pick over there in Pittsburgh. That team is incredible, undefeated still. Who knows how long they'll go with that record. Finally, we conclude here with the most valuable player of the NFL season to this point. Andrew, who do you have for this?
Now, I mentioned Russell Wilson and the fact that he's never won an MVP, and I'm going to go the way Sam went. I should pick Russell Wilson, but I'm going with Patrick Mahomes. 21-1. He leads the NFL in total offense. I believe it's somewhere in the realm of 2,600 yards or so. And to me, besides that game against the Raiders, where a lot of people said he wasn't great, and he wasn't. He only threw a pick, I think it was 15-23. But again, aside from that one game, he has been basically perfect. And this Kansas City Chiefs team, nobody's really been talking about them because of the Steelers and some other surprises from both the NFC and the AFC, the Tampa Bay Bucks. Obviously, we're seeing what the NFC West is doing. So Kansas City's really gotten lost in the shuffle. And to me, Patrick Mahomes, after that game against the Jets, and I know it's against the Jets, but that kind of feels like something where we're going to springboard and see Mahomes go on a crazy tear in the next few weeks. And I think he's just reminding everyone, in the great words of Roy Jones Jr., y'all must have forgot. And Patrick Mahomes right now has made his entrance, and he is going to look for his second MVP trophy.
Patrick Mahomes is the best player in football. I'm not taking that away from him, but say it with me. Let Russ cook. And I don't think there's a quarterback in the league that has to do more for his team to win than Russell Wilson. Because you look at these Seahawks games, like these are white knuckle games. Like they do not play normal games in Seattle. They really never have. But Russell Wilson, what he is doing is incredible. And that offense is clicking, and he has to do so much. And a lot of these games are close, but you see what he does late in games. He's so good. This is the year he gets his due. He's not just never won an MVP, he's never gotten an MVP vote. So it's really ridiculous at this point. I honestly believe, and it's not to take away from Lamar Jackson, if I would have had an MVP vote last year, it would have gone to Russell Wilson. This year, it would definitely go to Russell Wilson. I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in football. He's the most valuable. And that fulfills the distinction of the award. And I give it to Russell Wilson, and I give him the nod.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jimmy. I got to take Russell Wilson. When I say he's led the Seahawks, he has led the Seahawks, like you said. I mean, they're 6-1. They're having a great year. And a lot of that credit goes to Russell Wilson. His stats are insane. 26 touchdowns to start the year. He's on pace for almost 4,500 passing yards. It's insane to me that he's never gotten an MVP vote, but if any year is a year, it's this one. I I think Patrick Mahomes certainly might be the only guy who can catch him. Obviously, you can't go against probably the best player in football right now. But I have the most valuable player as Russell Wilson for this season.
Cool. So 2 for Russ, 1 for Mahomes, and we will leave it at that. Andrew, Sam, good being with you guys here tonight, just about at 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. Special thank you to our guests tonight, Paul Westhead, former basketball coach, David Krell, the author of Mets and Popular Culture, and Otis Livingston from CBS 2. The sports director of WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. Our show tonight has been produced by Alex Wolfs. Again, for my partner, Andrew Posadas, and Sam Davis with the headlines, I'm Jimmy Sullivan, thanking you for listening. One on One has been a production of WFUV Sports.